The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight. With few exceptions, but this is page 176. With few exceptions, most Native American cultures did not have our notions as part of their collective mythos. Instead of the story that we're separate from creation and born to dominate it, these older cultures held a different view of the place of humans in the order of creation. They believe we are part of the world. We are made of the same flesh as other animals. We eat the same plants. We share the same air, water, soil, and food with every other life form on the planet. We are born into life by the same means as other mammals, and when we die, like them, we become part of the soil that will nourish future generations. They also believe it is our destiny to cooperate with the rest of creation. Every life form has its special purpose in the grand ecosystem, and all are to be respected, they believed. Each animal and plant has its own unique intelligence and spirit. We are permitted to compete with other plants and animals, but we may not wantonly destroy them. All life is absolutely as sacred as human life. Although hunting and killing for food are part of nature's order, when we do so, it must be done with respect and thankfulness. Older cultures are most often cooperators, not dominators. There are human cultures who do not engage in the destruction of the world. They demonstrate that destruction and domination are not an inevitable part of human nature. Prior to the emergence of younger cultures about 7,000 years ago, the anthropological record shows that not one culture believed itself to be separate from and superior to nature. We find the remnants of these older cultures in tribal people around the world, such as the San, the Kogi, the Ik of Uganda, the Navajo, the Hopi, the Cree, the Ojibwa, living in harmony with the world around them, the people around them, and seeing all life as sacred. The San Bushmen don't even qualify as Stone Age, since they've never used stone implements, only tools made from wood. And yet they were successfully pursuing their way of life 40,000 years before Aristotle, and they still are. They leave behind few traces, as they are such masters of resource management. That's sustainability. And contrary to the stories of our culture, it was and is often a happy and comfortable life. When we lived like that thousands of years ago, we enjoyed cradle-to-grave security. The tribe took care of itself. We cared for one another. If anybody had food, everybody had food. If anybody had a diseased child or an infirm parent, everybody had a diseased child or an infirm parent. The measure of wealth in such societies was security. Mediums of exchange like money were unnecessary. The idea of hoarding food or other things was unthinkable because everybody was responsible for everybody. Our ancient ancestors lived in the way of all other cooperator societies in nature, but be they the society of wolves or chimpanzees or prairie dogs, they looked out for one another. Our ancestors, people like you and me of all races and all continents, lived like this all over the world for 40 to 200,000 years, depending on whose archaeology you accept. And then there were eruptions among traditional cultures. In some parts of the world, people began to move away from their hunting and gathering lifestyle by experimenting with agriculture. This created more efficient food production, thus increasing their numbers and giving some people the ability to hoard food, the beginning of what we call wealth. Then a subgroup of the agriculturalists began experimenting with a new cultural idea of coercive or forced evangelism, of bringing others into their culture in a way that had never been done before. Their gods told me that if they couldn't evangelize others, then they should utterly destroy them. They were a very few, probably not more than a dozen tribes, which arose out of the tens of thousands of tribes that populated the planet. And this small number of tribes proceeded to wipe out and displace and destroy the thousands of other tribes who were living in a sustainable, peaceful, and connected to nature way. They left the garden and began to create dominating city-states and then empires. They were the first people infected with Wetiko, the origin of our younger culture. And because of this, they had become more efficient at increasing their own numbers. They had more sunlight under their own personal control. Of course, there was a price to pay for this. While the San, Kogi, Ik, and other native peoples may spend less than 2 to 4 hours a day gathering food and attending to the needs of life, and do to this day, by the way, in younger culture societies, this balance was radically shifted as average people must work longer and harder just to survive. Those who were the dominating individuals in the culture, however, could live luxuriously and work less and less. So for every person who only worked an hour or two a day, another person would have to work 4 or 8 or 10 hours a day or more. Without massive exploitation of resources or theft from others, for every person with 10 times as much wealth, 10 people must have only 1/10 as much. Social and economic classes were born, and the first governments came into being to define, order, and control the socioeconomic structure and help the wealthy maintain and increase their riches. Whether they knew it or not, these governments, mostly kingdoms in the early days, transmitted younger culture values to all citizens, rich and poor. The power brokers of this time programmed the consciousness of their subjects, just as our governments, educational institutions, and mass media do today. Nobody knows what brought about the first eruption of Wetiko cultural insanity, but logic suggests it was most likely happened in places where food resources were only cyclically abundant. For example, the Tlingit and Weda Native American tribes of the Pacific Northwest and the area around Vancouver Island were apparently extensive traders and owners of slaves. And this was because they could store food. This is where it all began, beginning wealth. Anyhow, the book is The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight. This is just a small dip into it.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. The headline on by Jessica, an article by Jessica Schulberg over on Huffington Post: controversial Trump aide Catherine Gorka helped end funding for group that fights white supremacy. Way back last January, the Department of Homeland Security officially awarded a $400,000 grant to a group called, as part of its Countering Violent Extremism program, to a group called Life After Hate, which works to de-radicalize neo-Nazis. Sebastian Gorka's wife, according to this article in the Huffington Post, played a role in killing that. This is very strange. On the line with us is Tony McAleer. He is a former organizer with the White Aryan Resistance and currently the board chair and co-founder of lifeafterhate.org, the organization I was just telling you about that Catherine Gorka is, helped defund. You can tweet him at lifeafterhate or at McAleer. The website, lifeafterhate.org. Tony, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Tom.
Thanks for joining us. You are right now running an organization that helps basically Nazis overcome their... Well, I shouldn't be describing it. You should. Tell me what your organization does.
Well, we help people leave the place where we once were. And the mission statement, which kind of describes sort of how we do it, of Life After Hate, is to inspire individuals and communities to a place of compassion and forgiveness for themselves and for all people. And I think when we can get those two things in balance, someone who has those in balance can't hold that type of ideology.
So what took you into the White Aryan Resistance, and what got you out of it?
Well, if I go back and look at my life, I came... there's nothing that stands out as extraordinary. I was a white middle-class, upper-middle-class kid. My father was a psychiatrist. Perhaps that explains it. I think I was this, if I look at who little Tony was, I was this bright, sensitive, curious, mischievous, a little stubborn and defiant little kid. Growing up in a household and a school where it wasn't safe to be that. And at the age of 10, I walked in on my father with another woman, and that was sort of when the God fell off the pedestal, so to speak, and my parents became all too human, and that left me really angry and confused, and I started to act out at school, and I went from a straight A student in grade 5 to a C student in grade 6, and I went to an all-boys Catholic school, and my parents and the school in their wisdom decided, they came to an agreement that they would try and beat the grades into me. And if I didn't get an A or a B on major tests or assignments, I was marched down to the teacher's office and hit on the rear end with a yardstick. And in those moments over and over again in that office, I don't think I ever, even to this day, felt more powerless than I did then. And I went from listening to Queen and Elton John to The Clash and the Sex Pistols, and really, really angry and disruptive at school, and got into the punk scene, and that led to the skinhead scene. And the first skinheads I met actually wanted to rob me for my Doc Martens. And my bullying survival strategy was befriend the bully, become the bully. And in order for me to have their protection, I had to have their respect. And in order for me to have their respect, I had to commit all the same acts of violence that they did. But I felt powerful at the time. And I don't want to blame anything on my childhood. Everything I did, I chose to do. And I share my childhood to offer an insight into the lens through which I made those decisions. The analogy I like to use is, have you ever been to the grocery store when you're really hungry and you make those unhealthy choices?
Oh, yeah.
Very different choices than when you're healthy. I went out into the world as a young man emotionally hungry, and the choices I made were extremely harmful to society, harmful to all kinds of individuals, which I hurt with my violence, and communities that I hurt with my words, and it hurt me.
I remember quite vividly back in the 60s and 70s, Ted Patrick, a friend of mine, Hilly Zeitlin, some other people who worked to deprogram people who had been basically captured by cults like the Moonies and Guru Maharaji and the Perfect Master, this 13-year-old kid who, and all this stuff that you may be too young to remember, but it strikes me that there are some parallels here between the kind of deprogramming they were doing and what you're doing, or is there not? Do you see yourself as a deprogrammer or as a safe place? And are you finding that most of the people that you're helping get out of the skinhead, Nazi, white racist, white supremacist world have backstories similar to yours of a childhood feeling disempowered and frightened?
Absolutely. And for us to go in and try and tackle the ideology head on is a big challenge, because at this point, for myself, and it's true for others, ideology and identity become intertwined. And if you attack someone's ideology that's in that place, you attack their identity and they shut down, and you don't get anywhere. What we find, and the University of Maryland did a research from their studies of terrorism and responses to terrorism program, and they found the number one correlated factor in the history of someone joining a violent extremist group was childhood trauma. And they were sort of talking about the physical side of childhood trauma, but I think it's more about the emotional side, because you can have emotional trauma without a physical component. And I think what it does is to a young person at a deep subconscious level, John Bradshaw is a great author that I think explains it really well with his Healing the Shame That Binds You. We come out of our childhood with this toxic shame, the feeling that we're not good enough, we're not smart enough, we're not lovable, we're insignificant. And we go out in the world and live our lives in reaction to that. And for him, toxic shame was the root of all addiction, but I think it's the root of all gangs. It's the root of a whole spectrum of antisocial outcomes, of which violent extremism is one. If we look at the young men who were arrested for the ISIS attacks in Brussels and Paris, we don't see people who were dedicated to Islam or people who found ISIS through the Quran. They were troubled youth. And I think it's that sense of search for belonging, identity, community, and a sense of purpose where there is none. And the fuel behind that is shame. I think shame is the driver for both shame at an individual level and collective shame. I think structural racism creates shame, Islamophobia creates shame, overt racism creates shame, bullying creates shame. And shame is if you look at what is the opposite word to shame, and there's two that often come to mind, and it's pride and honor. And these movements are like a hyper expression and an unhealthy false expression of pride and restoring lost honor.
So how do you meet that need for pride and honor in people who are leaving an organization that lavishes it upon them and gives them the opportunity to flaunt themselves on national television, as we saw this last weekend? How do you do that?
Well, it's the opposite. The way to heal and the antidote to shame is compassion. So we treat them with compassion and try to reconnect them to their humanity, and it's like more of a healing process, because I believe that the level to which we dehumanize other human beings is a reflection of how disconnected and dehumanized we are inside. And when we can make that reconnection happen, then it's possible to recognize the humanity in others, and it changes things. If I share with you the stories, and I'll share with you my own story of how we come back from that, compassion, a story of compassion shows up, and it shows up in two major ways. One is the birth of a child, and anecdotally, it seems to be a female child. I think there's something about that feminine energy being introduced into the hypermasculine that has a transformative effect. And children are safe to love. For me, it was safe for me to let down my guard and my shield and my mask of who I had become to protect that sensitive little Tony, because they're incapable of harming and shaming and ridiculing. It's safe to love a child. It's a safe space to open up, and that began the thawing process for me. The second part was receiving compassion from someone who I didn't feel I deserved it from. And sort of about 8 years after I had left the movement, and the movement hadn't quite left me, I'd sort of still harbored a lot of that stuff. I started doing some personal growth work and ego work and law of attraction stuff, and the guy who ran the course, I really connected with him, and he was also a counselor. So my friend for my birthday gave me a one-on-one counseling session, and I'm sitting there telling him for the first time, because I carried so much shame about the things that I had done, and when I had revealed in the past, or people had found out in the past, I lost friendships and whole social circles. So I was always very guarded with this, and I spilled my guts to him, and he looks at me and he starts smiling. And I look at him and I go, what's so funny? This is odd, right? This is my first therapy session, and I wasn't expecting that reaction. And he says, I was born Jewish, right? And here's a man who I admire, respected, considered, a friend, a man who loved me, who wanted to see me heal, and offering me this compassion and seeing the human inside me when I was incapable of seeing it. Yet I had once advocated for the destruction of him and his people. That was mind-blowing. And these stories of compassion show up over and over and over again in the stories of people that have left this type of hatred behind. When we're compassionate with someone, what we do is we hold up a mirror and we allow them to see the humanity that they don't normally see reflected back at them through our compassion. And when we can reconnect people to their humanity, the ideology doesn't make any sense anymore. The foundation of separation that holds it up disappears.
That's remarkable. The organization is lifeafterhate.org, and you can tweet at lifeafterhate. Tony McAleer, former organizer with the White Aryan Resistance, now the board chair and co-founder of Life After Hate. And they're in a bit of a pinch right now since the Gorka family has essentially, apparently, according to this article in Huffington Post, gone after them. So I encourage you to check out their website, lifeafterhate.org. Tony, thanks for dropping by today.
Thank you very much.
It's a good, powerful and compelling story. It's great talking.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back in just a minute. Stick around. And welcome back. Gary, watching Free Speech TV in Kingmont, West Virginia. Hey, Gary, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Thom Hartmann. Thank you.
Oh, hi, Gary. It's been a while. What's up?
Yeah, well, I did call a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
God bless you. I'm just going to say you're to be admired as usual. Keep up the great work. I just have a short thought. You know, just my opinion for what it's worth. It's very clear now that this is not the individual who we need in the White House. You just can't seem to unite America. And I think we need somebody to make some inroad. We're not going to do it overnight, but we need somebody to make inroads on that instead of dividing us more. This is unbelievable to me. So in that sense, I'd like to quote an old Greek proverb. It's from an old Greek playwright. As a matter of fact, I can't pronounce his name. You know what he said? He said this: to me, and this I'm paraphrasing. To me, this is the real challenge for mankind, not only for America and the world, is to tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of this world. To me, that's the real challenge.
Yeah, I was, half expecting Tony to have, like a 12-step program or 10-step or whatever they're called, and some, and what he's doing is something very, very straightforward. Offering personal counseling and we're here for you and we'll help bring you back. That's powerful stuff. It's so sad that the Trump administration has defunded his group. Yeah, of course they're helping bring Nazis out of Nazism. So of course the Trump administration is going to defund them. But and it tells us a lot about the Trump administration. But have you ever known such people, Gary?
That know how to divide instead of unite?
Have you who call themselves Nazis or who are unrepentant racists and anti-Semites?
That's a great question. I heard somebody that was asking somebody else, and they said, no, I really, in my lifetime, being I'm 72 in September, and just glad to be a member of the planet, I really have not met it, but I have felt that that terrible word hate. It's in the air, but particularly any person, no. Have you?
When I was a kid, this was when I was, maybe a preteen, was when they were doing the so-called forced busing in Lansing, which is where I was going to school.
Yeah, right.
And our white junior high school suddenly had a bunch of black kids, and there were a number of white kids who I knew, who were very outspoken.
Sure.
But, they weren't, carrying around swastikas and torches. I don't think they even had, a sense of organization. But they may well be part of the movement now, this right-wing movement. God only knows. But, so I saw the edges of it. But that's about as close as I ever got. Gary, good to hear from you. Thanks a lot for the call. And thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 22 minutes past, or it's just a little past 22 minutes past.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
Richard Spencer said that has now come out this from TPM Matt Schuham. In today's TPM, white supremacist leader Richard Spencer asserted Monday that President Donald Trump wasn't being serious when he denounced hate groups by name. Spencer said at a press conference, "You can say racism is evil. We should all love one another. The sun should always shine 7 days a week. Everyone should be above average. Everyone should be a wonderful athlete. Everyone should love each other. It's just silliness. It's not serious, and I don't think anyone takes it seriously, including the president," is what Richard Spencer, basically the head Nazi here in the United States, had to say, or the guy who's doing the, Sieg Heil, or the Hail Victory with the Nazi salute. Sieg Heil means Hail Victory, and and he also, exactly, he was also saying Hail Trump. I mean, it's pretty extraordinary. But the amazing thing to me, the absolutely amazing thing to me that I totally missed on Saturday was, keep in mind, the entire thing in Charlottesville, and my apologies for calling it Charlotte yesterday. I grew up in Lansing, Michigan, and right down the road is Charlotte, Michigan. Anyhow, the main point of what happened in Charlottesville was these right-wing Nazis and Klan members protesting the removal of Robert E. Lee, their cherished history. The cherished history of the South is all over the right-wing and Nazi movements, and the so-called Confederate movement, this cherished history. And I totally missed when Trump on Saturday said this.
This can happen. My administration is restoring the sacred bonds of loyalty between this nation and its citizens. But our citizens must also restore the bonds of trust and loyalty between one another. We must love each other, respect each other, and cherish our history.
And cherish our history? Really? Cherish our history? I mean, it was just see, this is the sentence after the, on all sides, right? When he said on all sides. And somehow they cut this part out when they play it on the news over and over again. Cherish our history was an open shout out that had to have been written by one of the white nationalists in the White House. I mean, Donald Trump is not sophisticated or subtle enough to slip that in. And by the way, he gave this speech before Heather Heyer was murdered. Cherish our history. Yes, you guys, let's cherish that statue to Robert E. Lee, that treasonous, traitorous general. It's amazing. It's just absolutely amazing that the rest. Jake Tapper pointed this out on Sunday. Apparently, I found this just DuckDuckGoing the thing. But but it just kind of went down. It never went beyond that. Trump was shouting out. This is why he didn't want to say, he didn't want to call them out by name. He was shouting out to them. These are his people.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
More of the news of the day, and boy, do we have a pile of it. Your calls and my thoughts right after this. Today we're reading from my book, Rebooting the American Dream. This is Chapter 1, Bring My Job Home. And we're about halfway into the chapter here. It starts out with this section called The High Cost of Free Trade. During the 1930s, none of the Asian powerhouse economies had adopted American industrialization strategies. So when Franklin Roosevelt put money into workers' pockets and they bought toys or clothes or radios, all those items were made in Alabama or Connecticut or Michigan. Now they're made in China, which experienced a labor shortage in 2009, causing its average wage to increase from 80 cents an hour to $1.14 an hour, and its economy to grow by more than 8%. China has been following the lead of Japan, Taiwan, and South Korea during the past half-century and has become an industrial powerhouse as a result. And ironically, each of these countries got its strategy from us. George Washington's Treasury Secretary, Alexander Hamilton, proposed it in 1791. And by 1793, most of the parts of his report on the subject of manufactures had been instituted as a series of legislative and policy steps. And it didn't start with Hamilton. He was just building on King Henry VII's Tudor Plan of 1485, which turned England from a backwater state with raw wool as its chief export into a major developed state that was producing fine clothing and other textile products from wool. He accomplished this by severely restricting the export of wool from England with high export tariffs and restricting the import of finished woolen goods with high import tariffs. King Henry learned this from the Dutch. They copied the Romans, and the Romans got it from the Greeks 3,000 years ago. Nonetheless, President Obama continues to follow his predecessors, Bush Jr., Clinton, Bush Sr., and Reagan, all in the religious belief that free trade will save us all. It's all nonsense. Free trade is a guaranteed ticket to the poorhouse for any nation, and the evidence is overwhelming. Even the phrase free trade was introduced by King Henry VII back in the 1400s as something that England should encourage other countries to do while it maintained protectionism. A more contemporary example of the application of that wisdom could be seen in South Korea. In the 1960s, South Korea was an undeveloped nation whose major exports were human hair for wigs and fish, and whose average annual income was around $400 per working family. Today, it's a major industrial power with an average annual per capita income of more than $32,000, and it beats the United States in its rate of college attendance, exports, and lifespan. Korea did this by closing its economy and promoting its export industries. A decade earlier, Japan had done the same thing. 40 years earlier, Germany had done it. In July of 2009, with no evident irony or understanding of how South Korea went about becoming a modern economic powerhouse, President Obama lectured the countries of Africa during his visit to Ghana. As the New York Times reported, quote, Mr. Obama said that when his father came to the United States, his home country of Kenya had an economy about as large as that of South Korea per capita. Today, he noted, Kenya remains impoverished and politically unstable, while South Korea has become an economic powerhouse, end quote. In that day's newspaper, or the next day's newspaper, the lead editorial titled Tangled Trade Talks repeated the essence of the mantra of its confused op-ed writer, Thomas L. Friedman, that so-called free trade is the solution to a nation's economic ills. But South Korea did not ride the free trade train to success. South Korean economist Ha Joon-ching details South Korea's economic ascent in his 2007 book, Bad Samaritans, The Myth of Free Trade and the Secret History of Capitalism. In 1961, South Korea was, as the president said, as poor as Kenya, with an $82 per capita annual income and many obstacles to economic growth. South Korea's main exports were primary commodities, such as tungsten, fish, and human hair for wigs, and that's how the Korean technology giant Samsung started, by exporting fish, fruits, and vegetables. Today, it's the world's largest conglomerate by revenue, $173 billion. By throwing out free trade and embracing protectionism during the 1960s, South Korea managed to do in 50 years what it took the United States 100 and Britain 150 years to do. After a military coup in '61, General Park Chung-hee implemented short-term plans for South Korea's economic development. He instituted the Heavy and Chemical Industrialization Program, and South Korea's first steel mill and modern shipyard went into production. South Korea also began producing its own cars and used import tariffs to discourage imports. Electronics, machinery, and chemical plants soon followed, all sponsored or subsidized and tariff protected by the government. Between 1972 and 1979, the per capita income grew more than 5 times. In addition, new protectionist slogans were adopted by South Korean citizens. For example, it was viewed as a civic duty to report anyone caught smoking foreign cigarettes. All the money made from exports went into developing industry. South Korea enacted import bans, high tariffs, and excise taxes on thousands of products. South Korea's transformation was, to quote Chang, as if Haiti had turned into Switzerland. This transformation was accomplished through protecting fledgling industries with high tariffs and subsidies, and only by gradually opening itself to global competition. In addition, the government ran or heavily funded many of the larger industries, at least until they were globally competitive. The government ran or regulated the banks and therefore the credit. It controlled foreign exchange and used its currency reserves to import machinery and industrial products. Now, I'm not suggesting that latter part for the United States, but the fact of the matter is that protecting your economy works. And we're basically the only developed country in the world that doesn't do it any longer. Rebooting the American Dream is the book.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. A couple of quick things. There's the phone lines are all lit up. People want to talk about all kinds of stuff, and we will get to that in just a second. But there's so much going on, so much news. I received an email from Credo Action. It's the website is credoaction.com, CREDO action.com. And it says, fresh off renewing the racist war on drugs and boosting private prisons, Attorney General Jeff Sessions is now going after sick people in a private letter to congressional leaders. Now, this is a letter that Sessions sent to Republicans in Congress. Sessions demanded permission to prosecute medical marijuana providers and patients. They point out in states where medical marijuana is permitted, fewer people get hooked on dangerous opioids. Sessions' dangerous crusade will put sick folks at risk and supercharge the opioid epidemic. He's going after sick people. Sessions personally requested that the Senate Appropriations Committee reject an amendment in place since 2014 that bans the Department of Justice, which is what Jeff Sessions runs, from interfering with states that permit medical marijuana distribution, use, or possession. In other words, if you are a legal medical marijuana user, Jeff Sessions wants to arrest you and put you in jail. He's coming for you. And he's asked the Republicans in the House of Representatives and the Senate to give him the power to do that. I don't know why this is not at the top of the news. This is pretty mind-boggling stuff. This is just kind of by way of letting you know about something that I thought was really cool. Code Pink, Medea Benjamin's a frequent guest on our program. Code Pink is a great organization that I'm a big supporter of. And I wanted to go on this trip. We just have so much coming up between now and the end of the year that I'm not able to. In fact, Louise and I damn near did it, but we just couldn't make it work. But they're planning a trip to Cuba in October, around Halloween time. And they say we'll visit rural farms and urban co-ops, listen to some of the island's best musicians, visit the homes of fantastic artists, tour the medical school that trains students from around the world, meet with representatives of the National Assembly, hear from brilliant professors and inspiring students, enjoy the world-famous beaches that Donald Trump doesn't want you to visit, get a spectacular tour of Havana, travel to the countryside, and more. And they're also going to have Trump's policies are scary blowout Halloween party with their Cuban partners, complete with the world's best music and mojitos. So if you want the information on that, get over to codepink.org. And finally, not finally, I've got a whole bunch more stuff here, which we will get to as we continue through the program. But have you ever heard of Directive 30? Directive 30, Matthew Dessem has a piece on Slate.com today that's absolutely brilliant. And I was unfamiliar with this, and he reprints it. Directive 30 was issued in May of 1946. After World War II was over, this was a directive from the U.S. military, to the U.S. military and all the Germans in Germany. And it basically, on or after the date of this directive, the planning, designing, erection, installation, posting, or other display of any monument, memorial, poster, statue, edifice, street or highway name marker, emblem, tablet, or insignia, which tends to preserve and keep alive the German military tradition, to revive militarism, or to commemorate the Nazi Party, or which is of such a nature as to glorify incidents of war and the functioning of military museums and exhibitions, and the erection, installation, or posting of other displays on a building or other structure of any of the same will be prohibited and declared illegal. Also prohibited and declared illegal the reopening of military museums and exhibitions. Every existing monument, poster, statue, edifice, street or highway name marker, emblem, tablet, or insignia of a type, the planning, designing, erection, installation, posting, or other display of which is prohibited in paragraph 1, which I just read to you, must be completely destroyed and liquidated by 1 January 1947. Also, all military museums and exhibitions must be closed and liquidated by 1 January 1947 throughout the entire German territory. And then after the 1st of January, after all this stuff has been destroyed, on or after 1 January 1947, the retention or display knowingly of any monument, memorial, poster, statue, edifice, military museum or exhibition, street or highway name marker, emblem, tablet, or insignia of a type, the planning, designing, erection, installation, or posting of or other display of which is prohibited by paragraph 1 and the destruction of which is required by paragraph 2 of this directive will be prohibited and declared illegal. Why the hell didn't we do this after the Civil War? We had a 4-year war where a group of traitorous, treasonous slaveholders and who wanted to preserve the institution of slavery, which is exactly what North Carolina said in their secession document, or maybe it was South Carolina, in their secession document. It was South Carolina. Thank you, Troy. It was all about slavery, they said. Why are we not going around and just simply destroying these monuments? This is not anybody's heritage who is alive today. This is an evil and dark part of our past. So anyhow, that's a couple of things here. Pick up your phone calls. John in Minneapolis. Hey, John, what's on your mind?
Well, I sort of changed a bit what I wanted to say. I haven't heard anything from Donald Trump condemning as an act of terrorism the bombing of a mosque in Bloomington, where the Mall of America is. It's a suburb of Minneapolis. And the only time he came here, and the only thing he ever said about the Somali community was very negative. Right. He came here, he was here about 15 minutes to the Humphrey terminal, got off the plane and made some snarky comment about Somalis. So that's one thing.
Yeah. So for people who don't realize or who don't know what you're talking about, there's a large Somali community in Minneapolis. Yeah. Right. Some refugees, some simply expats, but there's and Somalis, of course, from Somalia, which is part of Africa, are black and therefore,
And actually they got here because they found that people in positions of power, like politicians, i.e. Rudy Perpich, and who was a governor, he started the Center for the Victims of Torture. So this state has long been very welcoming, either through churches, NGOs, or even governmental agencies, to invite people from war-torn places. I think it was because people who came here with nothing, who were basically pushed out of their homelands. There was like 2 classes in Norway or in Sweden or in other places, and they were just dirt poor, and they came here and they were so happy that they, made it.
Yeah.
And so, and it's not my heritage at all. I'm Italian, part Jewish, and somewhat Scots-Irish. And, but I've always been impressed with, that bent and the goodwill of people in Minnesota. But I did want to speak a bit about Christianity and like the KKK usurping symbols of Christianity. And I think that the problem with Christianity, and I am a very devoted Christian, but I do see when it aligns itself with state power and, then allows itself to be used, and the idea of the apostles, when they went to speak to the Colossians, they accepted anything that was of good repute, was beautiful, was acceptable, art, literature, whatever it was that they produced. The liturgy I celebrated today myself is built on the Jewish temple worship. So, Christianity started out very syncretic, and it still should be that way. It shouldn't, true Christianity doesn't go in and denigrate other people's religions. It takes from their religion, their philosophy, their culture, and it works with that. That's what you're supposed to do. That's how they evangelized within the Roman Empire. It's only later on, after Constantine, and when it became church and state.
Right.
And if you even look at that dynamic, it's never been a very good one. In fact, in the Orthodox Church, in Russian Orthodox Church, they said, that the Romanovs sealed their fate when they usurped the power from the bishops. Way back. This was way back. The Muscovites and these people did that, and it's always been a problem, and I guess it always will be. But I think it's part of our cultural and maybe genetic makeup that we end up with, a lot of violence. We are just violent people, I guess, really, and it takes a lot, I think, for people to overcome that. I don't know what to say more about it. It's so complex.
Yeah, no, I think you've said it all, and all these crosses that you see, and whatnot. This neo-Christian iconography that these Nazis are using is a total, absolutely right, John, total perversion of Christianity, and these guys should be appalled. John, thank you so much for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls right after this. Welcome back. Mark in Selden, New York. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
On your mind.
I've been watching the coverage like you have on cable news for the last couple of days, and I'm struck by how the right-leaning channels like Fox News, they seem to feel obligated to defend these people's freedom of speech. And they seem to feel obligated to keep pointing out their First Amendment rights and that they should have the right to speak and be heard and so on and so forth. And I'm struck by the fact that we don't do that for other terrorist groups. Nobody is tripping over themselves to ensure that Al-Qaeda or ISIS are heard and that their views are respected.
Good point.
And nobody does that for other criminal organizations. We don't make sure that MS-13 gang members or Bloods or Crips' First Amendment rights are not violated. But yet, for some reason,
these are white people. That's the reason.
I think that's
it's really that simple.
It really is that because they're white, they're being treated differently. And really, when you look at it, what they've been allowed to do, they've been allowed to basically rebrand themselves and relabel themselves. And the same group of people that we used to call skinheads and neo-Nazis are now being called alt-right or white nationalists or something that's a little bit more digestible for the public.
Yeah.
And not only have they been able to do that, but because of that, that's really all it took for them to be invited to the table. And they're actually a part of the national conversation. They actually have input into policy, and they've been legitimized in a way that no other terrorist group could ever possibly be. And it's something that people need to start to stand up and speak about, that we, even at the highest levels in the White House, have people who are known, white supremacists and terrorists or supporters of this cause. And the idea that a terrorist group can get their people that high up in our official channels, it's unbelievable. And it really didn't take much, Tom, for them.
And they show up on cable news. I've not seen anybody representing Al-Qaeda or ISIS on cable news being treated to the, well, let's have a conversation about this treatment. And yet the white supremacists, maybe they'll get argued with a little bit, or kind of snarkily talked down to. But you're absolutely right. You would not see that if it was Al-Qaeda. You would not see that if it was the Crips or the Bloods. You are absolutely right, Mark.
And it's a funny thing that it took so little for these groups to be accepted and to be invited to the table.
Well, that's white privilege.
One layer of subterfuge, Just relabel yourself. That's it. Just don't use the N-word in public when you're speaking.
Well, this is when David Duke took off the robes and decided he was going to run for the state legislature, and he successfully ran. He was actually either a state senator or a state representative in Louisiana for one term. I mean, that's that rebranding, and yeah, spot on. Mark, thank you. That's a great frame. I really appreciate it. I'm going to use that as much as I can. Thank you, Mark. And thanks for watching this on YouTube. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Andrew in Pueblo, Colorado. Hey, Andrew, you're on the air. What's up?
How you doing, Tom?
Good. What's on your mind?
I just got one question. Where's the veterans groups on all this madness that went on this weekend? I mean, they should be speaking out about how we fought against Nazis.
Yeah. And there have been a lot of veterans speaking out. I mean, I tweeted on Saturday that, by Trump's logic, my dad was engaged in hate and bigotry when he joined the Army in 1944 to go fight Nazis. Now, he didn't end up fighting Nazis because the war ended while he was in basic training. But that was his goal. And what? Fighting Nazis is hate and bigotry and, because Trump said all sides. Back to you, Andrew. Forgive the interruption.
The thing that really grabs me about this is a lot of those guys down there, those Nazis and whatnot, they have had grandparents or great-grandparents who fought in World War II.
Yep.
Someone in their family did something to support the war against the Nazis, and to me, that they're down there just so disrespectful to their families.
Yeah, it really is. And in fact, I think it was a 94-year-old veteran of World War II tweeted yesterday, essentially about this. And it picked up some cachet on the internet anyway. I saw it in several sites. Andrew's spot on. Thank you for the call, and thanks for sharing that with us. Anne-Marie in Seattle. Hey, Anne-Marie, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Just a quick comment. You had asked one of your previous callers, had they ever come across anyone Nazis? And as a doctor, I'm privileged to meet a lot of interesting people. And the most interesting person I met was when I was 15 years ago at the VA in Boise. I met a very prominent figure in the Aryan nations who came in with a swollen ankle, and I was a training doctor, so I had to call in the head of rheumatology, who interestingly was black, wonderful mentor, intelligent guy. And he put a needle in the guy's ankle and fixed his problem, and the patient, who was the prominent Aryan nation figure, thanked him. So I'm not sure whether that exposes the hypocrisy of individuals who are Aryan nations or Nazi, or it just exposes their humanity and that we're all vulnerable when we're sick. But I'll leave your listeners decide that.
Yeah, it's easy to spout that kind of stuff when you don't have somebody right in front of you. I've seen this the debates that we have, for example, on my TV program. I've noticed that when issues of race are being discussed and we have a person of color on the progressive side, and there's always, there's a conservative in the debate. The conservatives are almost always white, not always, but that the white conservatives actually there's a change, a calibration, a recalibration in the way that they're reacting, which is why I think it's so important that we all get to know each other and interact with each other. That's a great story. Anne-Marie, thank you very much for calling and sharing it with us. I appreciate hearing from you. Ray in Las Vegas. Hey, Ray, what's on your mind today?
The hypocrisy of how the police responded to different groups. I've sat back and watched, Dr. King and his group, they'll march and they get responded with water cannons.
Oh, look at Dakota Access Pipeline protesters.
And an unbelievable police response.
Yeah.
And then you have these people that went to this town, and they went with helmets, sticks,
and weapons, guns.
Yeah, guns. Yeah, an armed escort, and they had shields and not a Spartan. Yeah, it would be a Spartan phalanx maneuver. and the police have no response.
Right.
I'm going, wait a minute, that's not a peaceful protest.
Right. Yep.
That's an armed encampment waiting for something to happen.
And this is not the first time we've watched police departments wait until the Nazis have beat up a few anti-fascists before they step in. And I think it. Well, I don't know. I don't want to second guess the police in Charlottesville, Virginia. I wasn't there, but from what I've seen, the pieces that I've seen of it, it's troubling. It's very troubling, Ray. I agree with you. Thanks for the call, and thanks for making that point. Carol in St. Paul, Minnesota. Hey, Carol, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hi, Tom. Take you off speaker. Okay.
Thank you.
It was today's show, and it was the fact that I've been traveling the last week, and so I've been kind of out of the news, and I knew what was going on, but I wasn't really deep into it. But we have heard since he took office that the way he runs his office is he pits people against each other.
He beating Trump?
Gets them fighting and everything. He's actually doing that to the whole darn country.
Yep.
When I go out to Facebook and I see, and I'm sure that some of them are bots and some of it is trolls, but I see people, they hate Bernie or they hate Hillary or how can you do this or how you can do that. He literally is getting a large number of people, and hopefully not a large enough number to not get rid of him, to fight amongst themselves who really should all be on the same page.
He being Donald Trump, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't disagree, and in fact, I've even noticed on some progressive message boards, if somebody comes in and says something flattering about Hillary or says something flattering about Bernie, depending on the board, all hell breaks loose. Everybody comes down on them, and I wonder sometimes if the people provoking these flame wars, these progressive circular firing squads are actually Republican provocateurs. I just, and some of them have been around for a long, long time, and they build up a social identity. But I keep remembering that the 2004 election, when on our message board, we had, during the 2004 election, we had all these people who were on there defending George W. Bush, and one of them was very outspoken. And he got to know us all. He told us about his life. He told us where he lived. He put pictures on there. He was a member of our community defending Bush and defending the war in Iraq. And after, and he must have posted 500 messages on ThomHartmann.com. And, he was very, very polished and very thoughtful. And after the election, in November, in December of 2004, or maybe it was January 2005, he came back on the board and posted a picture of himself in a Marine uniform. He had just, after the election, he had joined the Marine Corps to go off to Iraq. He actually believed in the war. But he told us all that he had been paid by the Post. Every single one of those posts on our message board, he had been paid to troll us. And although he did it very nicely. And I just wonder, what the hell is going on with all this stuff. But Carol, yeah, spot on. And Trump is basically running the Apprentice program. He's, his TV show. Let's pit people against each other. And tragically, it's working. Carol, so well said. Thank you so much. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
Thom Hartmann here with Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Unequal Protection, How Corporations Became People and How You Can Fight Back. This is from page 218. The subhead is, If Corporations Are Persons, Why Aren't There Crimes in the Crime Statistics? Every year, the Federal Bureau of Investigation issues a press release on its Uniform Crime Reporting Program, which determines the nation's crime index. It reports crimes by persons, which excludes, strangely enough, corporate persons, even when the corporations have been convicted of felonies. In its entire history, the FBI has never issued a report on crimes by corporate persons, although its reports on crimes by human persons are well-researched and well-publicized. The upshot of this is that when you ask people how most money and property are stolen or how most people are killed, they think of burglars and muggers and bank robbers and crimes of passion. They think of human persons. The reality, though, is that more money and property are stolen by or lost to corporate criminals than to human criminals. Russell Mochaber's corporate crime reporter noted that in 1998, when the FBI estimated robberies and burglaries at almost $4 billion, the cost of corporate crimes was in the hundreds of billions, as it is every year. These include security scams that ran around $15 billion that year, car repair fraud that hit around $40 billion that year, insurance swindles and corporate fraud found on your health insurance, HMO, and hospital billings that runs between $100 and $400 billion a year, 100 times greater than all the burglaries in the country combined. Then there are the occasional really big crimes like Neil Bush's savings and loans scandal that then Attorney General Dick Thornburgh called the biggest white-collar swindle in history, or the actions of banksters and defense contractors that get no investigations whatsoever from either the Bush or the Obama administrations. More people die as a result of corporate activity than because of the actions of deranged killers or overwrought spouses. According to the Corporate Crime Reporter, the FBI reported that 1998 saw about 19,000 Americans murdered at the hands of other people. But that same year, 56,000 people died from work-related diseases like black lung and asbestosis that went unreported by the FBI. And many times that number died from the silent violence of pollution, contaminated food, hazardous consumer products, and hospital malpractice. Much of the human death caused by corporate activity has arguable benefits. For example, the many cancers caused by compounds associated with plastics or pesticides. But the cost of these deaths isn't factored into the unit cost of the products. So there's no financial incentive for industry to develop toxin-free or toxin-reduced alternatives or to use the more expensive but less toxic alternatives that already exist. This is a process known as internalizing profits and externalizing costs. The corporation profits from the toxins, and the public pays for the cancers, both in healthcare costs and lost productivity from sick and dying workers. It's been a standard operating procedure for centuries and was pushed back against for only a few decades in the 1960s and 70s, with the consumer movement that came out of the publication of Rachel Carlson's book Silent Spring and Ralph Nader's book Unsafe at Any Speed. Since the Reagan administration, however, dumping externalities on the public has become a common and accepted practice across the business spectrum. One of the easiest ways to do it is to simply move the toxin-producing or toxin-using factory or process to a country with lax environmental and labor laws like China or Vietnam, so that not only are labor costs lowered, but more importantly, the cost of dealing with externalities like workmen's compensation from injury and exposure and toxic emissions and death in the workplace, so that all those costs drop to zero or close to it. And then there are the big mistakes. In 1998, one of America's largest meatpacking companies replaced a refrigerating unit on one of its processing lines. Shortly thereafter, the detectors it had in place on the line to look for the deadly cold-loving bacteria like Listeria monocytogenes started to react, indicating high levels of bacterial contamination. The company's response was immediate. Carolyn Smith DeWall of the Center for Science and the Public Interest told reporters Russell Mochaber and Robert Weissman, quote, "Then their studies started coming up positive, so they stopped testing. This company's Fourth Amendment right to privacy blocked surprise inspections by the government." They're a person, right? The detectors were apparently turned off for a full month before the Centers for Disease Control, frantically trying to find the source of the bacteria that was killing people, mostly children, all over the United States, used DNA fingerprinting to track the bacteria that was causing the nationwide outbreak of Listeria back to the plant, provoking a nationwide recall of millions of pounds of the product. But during that month, hundreds of people consuming this company's products were sickened by Listeria, and 21 humans died from it. U.S. Attorney's Office, according to Mochaber and Weissman, said, quote, "There was insufficient evidence to bring a felony charge against the company. Instead, the company paid a $200,000 fine and issued an unprecedented joint press release with the Bush administration's USDA that managed to say that the company had paid the fine without ever mentioning the brand name of the product that had contaminated and caused the deaths." This is truly amazing. I mean, corporate crime costs us more and kills more people, and we don't even talk about it. It's amazing. Anyhow, the book is Unequal Protection: How Corporations Became People and How You Can Fight Back. Just who cares memories? Or daily life.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us is Greg Palast, the investigative journalist with Truth Out and Rolling Stone, author and filmmaker of the new movie, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, which you can find over at Amazon and other places. And Greg Palast, of course, .com, gregpalast.com, the website, and you can tweet him at Greg_Palast. Greg, welcome back.
Glad to be with you, Tom.
It is always a pleasure and an honor to have you with us, my friend.
Wow.
So you have an 11-year-long employee, a guy who's been working for you for a decade for the Palast Investigative Fund, who was in Charlottesville, Virginia. Tell us the story.
Zach Roberts, who does our undercover filming and shooting. Zach D. Roberts is a brilliant investigative journalist who went down to Charlottesville, and he got something on camera that no one else seems to have gotten. There was a young black man, actually. He's a special ed teacher in his early 20s named DeAndre Harris. He was walking along the crowd of white supremacists and neo-Nazis, his local school teacher, and just said, "Go home." You know, that was his big, giant taunt. Go home. And they chased him down into a parking lot, a half a dozen neo-Nazis with weapons, iron rods, shields, and smashed him through a pushed him through a parking lot entry arm. The lumber broke. He fell to the ground. They picked up the lumber and smashed him over the head. They hit him with the iron bars. And then they started kicking him unconscious with their steel-tipped boots. And then when some of his friends just courageously ran down against these armed guys, they ran off, leaving one of their men with a 9mm Glock pistol, which he was going to use on the rescuers, except that our man, Zach Roberts, was there filming the whole thing. Thank God he had his camera up. Then he pointed the gun at Zach, who then remembered at that moment that he'd forgotten his bulletproof vest in the car. Shame on you, Zach. But he got the shot. Thank God the guy realized that pulling the trigger on a guy with who would have it all on camera was not a wise idea. He concealed the gun and fled. This story, while it's gone viral through the net, and thank you, Tom, for putting it on your television show and now on radio, and these pictures are horrible.
Yeah.
These pictures could have been, in fact, Zach was thinking of turning them black and white, but he was afraid that, which you usually do for newspapers, but he was afraid that people would think this is just some old shot from 1964 and the Ku Klux Klan beating up black protesters. This was just, it was horrible. And later he was able to try to get an ambulance to the young man and interviewed him later after he recovered a bit.
Have you had any success in identifying the assailants, these thugs who beat up this young black man?
Well, that's interesting, Tom, that you would ask that, because I have read in the paper that the Justice Department under Jeff Beauregard Sessions is looking for the neo-Nazis that are killing people. We have not been contacted by the FBI, the Justice Department, nor even the Charlottesville Police Department, despite a complaint being filed. By the way, our man was threatened with a semi-automatic weapon. We've gotten no contact. No one seems to care. And you know what? And here's the problem. I mean, by the way, as the Palace Investigative Fund, our team would never give up a source. But we're talking about, we have super high resolution raw footage, which could help identify these guys. The FBI has the files. They have the information. And they don't care. They haven't contacted this kid. He's filed a complaint. No one cares. We contact the police, nothing. FBI, nothing.
Wow.
And here's the problem. Except for the wonderful Thom Hartmann show, we're getting basically very little of the mainstream media noting that, yes, of course, it was much worse to have a neo-Nazi. I don't know why they call him neo-Nazis. A Nazi who ran over a score of people, killed this young woman,
Heather Heyer.
But there's no comparison with pulling a gun on and beating the bejesus out of this black school teacher. But still, the important point here is that the alt-right, so-called, the alt-righteous like to play the car incident. Well, that's one crazy guy. Well, I'm sorry. This was the whole phalanx of their march descended on one young black man and beat him. It's sickening to look at the photos. They're at gregpalace.com. I know that I hope that you're putting them up, or people go to your site.
I've retweeted some of this stuff. Yes, absolutely.
And because you have to see it to believe it. I know it's not easy to look at, but please do, because you have to know what's going on in America and what and when. And you know, our president said there's violence on many sides. The two sides I saw were the beaters and the kid that was being beaten, and the guy with the gun and our guy with the camera. Now, tell me about the many sides of the violence.
Right. Yeah. Well, Trump also in the next sentence said we must cherish our history. And of course, the so-called protests, I'd call it a riot, were all about, protesting the loss of the statue of Robert E. Lee. I think on Saturday, and this was before Heather Heyer was murdered, I think he was just shouting out to them. But yes, let me encourage everybody to get over to gregpalace.com, check it out, tweet it, Facebook it, share it, email it, let all your friends know. And hopefully the Justice Department and the Charlottesville Police will, and the state of Virginia Police will show some interest in this. This is mind-boggling. Greg, you're also somewhat of an expert on Venezuela and that situation. Trump last week said he's not ruling out military options in Venezuela. This is the first I've heard that we're on the brink of war with Venezuela. What the hell is going on down there?
Okay, I actually talked to the late President Hugo Chavez. He said, I hope that at that time Bush is not so stupid as to kill all our children. That's the phrase he used.
Wow. Kill
all our children. And he meant American children and Venezuelan children in a crazy operation. Look, Venezuela, it's a nation armed to the teeth, more armed than the United States, believe it or not. And you had, pro and anti-government demonstrators, all armed to the teeth. About 60 people have been killed on each side. It's horrible. But understand, it is still, even Jimmy Carter, who does not like the Chavista regime, has said that they have the fairest elections in the Americas. much more than the United States. And yes, the people were very upset that without any oil money, the price of oil has plummeted. No more social programs and all these wonderful things this incredible change in people's lives when the Chavez government gave out the oil wealth, which is brand new. It usually goes to Miami. He gave it out, but then the money ran out. Oil prices collapsed, and the people got upset. They voted in an opposition Congress. By the way, they keep saying it's a dictatorship. I didn't know that dictators let the people vote in an opposition Congress. Then, like in the U.S., when people voted in Trump, angry at Obamacare, it wasn't what they thought it would be. They're angry and they voted in Trump. Suddenly, buyer's remorse, just as we see in the U.S., and there it took the form of a petition for a constitutional convention, and they just had a vote on that. 8 million people, a massive turnout for that vote. So it's a democracy, a thriving one. Unfortunately, sometimes a violent one. But the last thing that should ever happen is to take those few crazy people with guns and add now artillery and our military. And I got to tell you one thing about Venezuelans. I know people, by the way, not only do President Maduro showed up in my office a few years ago to talk about those other options that Trump talked about. One of them was kidnapping the president, which they did in 2002, the last president. They literally kidnapped the president. And the U.S., by the way, here's a good one. The U.S. ambassador, when they kidnapped the president, ran down from the embassy and had his picture taken smiling with the hostage takers until they were arrested. That's one option. And assassination's another option. I was able to uncover a plot to assassinate then President Chavez. Now military options. I do know that we stole. I was able in my investigations for BBC television to find out that the U.S. government had stolen the voter files of Venezuela. Now, I'm not going to say what mischief they did with those voter files because I don't know. I just know that the files of Venezuela were stolen by U.S. Homeland Security. Wow. What for? You tell me. So, look, the last thing we want is even the right-wing regime of Colombia, the right-wing regime of Argentina, they have all said, are you crazy? They literally told our dear Vice President Pence, don't even discuss military options. We've had enough of military options in Latin America from the United States. Thank you.
Yeah. Wow. This is extraordinary. Two absolutely extraordinary stories. What's going on in Venezuela? What happened in Charlottesville, Virginia over the weekend? Get over to gregpalace.com. You can read all about it. You can tweet to Greg at Greg_Palace. If nothing else, say hi and thanks for being on our program. But share the good word. There's a lot of great information there. Greg, thanks so much for being with us today.
Well,
it's always great talking. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of the news of the day. Your calls and my thoughts right after this. And welcome back. Frank in Castaic, California. Am I saying that right, Frank?
Yeah. Hey, Tom. Castaic.
So what's up?
Hey, I just want to relate. It's kind of a funny story. My dad was a World War II vet, and when he got out, they cut a couple souvenirs, and one was a Nazi flag and a German sword. And we were little kids, we didn't know it was Halloween. We were trying to decorate the house. And we took the flag and we hung it up on the outside of the house.
Oh, my.
And my dad, when he came home, oh, my God, it was so funny. Oh, my God. I mean, it wasn't funny then. He panicked. It's funny now.
Yeah.
But he, what are you doing? He comes running out, and that thing had been up probably pretty much the whole day.
Oh, geez.
And the thing is that none of the neighbors, I mean, it's kind of on the main thoroughfare through the housing tract, and no one said anything.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Where was this?
It's in North County, L.A.
Uh-huh.
It's kind of a red area.
Well, people don't like to cause trouble like this, but still having a swastika big swastika in front of somebody's house. That's got to be jarring. Amazing. Frank, thanks for sharing that story. And, apparently your dad, like my dad, was, one of those hateful bigots that Donald Trump talks about, the people who oppose the Nazis, because they're on all sides, right? Frank, thanks a lot for the call. John in Ben Lomond, California. Hey, John, what's on your mind today? John?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Great. What's up?
So I can tell you a little bit about my journey through separatism, but first I would like to talk a tiny bit about democracy. So first of all, as far as our president right now, there's no losing strategy to breaking stuff. You just got to stay out of the way out of the bat. And there's really no losing strategy to breaking things. So I think he's winning all the time. So as far as democracy goes,
what do you mean? Hang on just a second. You said from Trump's perspective, it's not a losing strategy to break things. What do you mean by that?
In other words, there's no losing strategy. When you're just breaking stuff, you just got to stay out of the way of, make sure you don't hit yourself with the bat or whatever it is you're breaking with.
I would say it's a hell of a lot easier to break stuff than build stuff. And Trump is obviously essentially a lazy person, intellectually lazy, probably physically lazy. But I'm not sure it's as effective.
Right. Well, if your goal is to just break something, then my point is, if your goal is to just break something, like the democracy,
right,
then there's really no losing strategies that you can.
Good point.
That you can deploy.
Good point. I understand now. Yeah.
They're just different degrees of how winning you are. You're winning in different degrees.
Well, see, I think they're trying to actually not only destroy democracy, but replace it with an entrenched oligarchy. And they want to rewrite the Constitution to make that, the permanent state of the United States, is that we will be.
I wanted to talk about democracy.
Yeah.
So there's a thing here with patriotism and democracy. So, from my perspective, like learning about, for me, I was against it before I even knew what it was, because I was consuming a lot of media here in California, which was, I was.
John, we're running out of time here. I'm sorry. We'll have to continue this conversation next week. Thank you for the call.
Hi there, I'm Marie with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving donations, volunteering, or spreading the word about Free Speech TV, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to exist. And for that, I want to say thank you. Now you can give to the network powered by the people by donating an unwanted or used vehicle through our Vehicles of Change program. If you have an old car, RV, or even a motorcycle, Free Speech TV can use it to grow and thrive. You can make a bigger difference in supporting Free Speech TV by giving an old car. It's a great way to support the network without having to dig into your bank account. Just call 877-378-8669 and ask for more information about Vehicles of Change. Again, the number to call is 877-378-8669. If it has a VIN, we'll take it in. Thank you.
Welcome back. Some other news. Somebody had called earlier and said, where are the veterans speaking out against not just Donald Trump, speaking out against the Nazis and the racists and the Klan members in Charlottesville, West Virginia. The Veterans of Foreign Wars, the VFW, an organization that my father and grandfather were both members of, today issued this press release. On behalf of the nearly 1.7 million members of the Veterans of Foreign Wars of the United States and its auxiliary, we extend our deepest condolences to the families of Heather Heyer, Virginia State Police Lieutenant H.J. Cullen and Trooper Burke M.M. Bates, and almost 24 others who were injured Saturday when white nationalists clashed with counter-protesters in Charlottesville, Virginia. There is no reason or excuse great enough to justify violence against others just because you disagree with their ideology, backgrounds, religious beliefs, or ethnicities. Individuals and organizations who wave Nazi flags and who use the First Amendment as both shield and sword must be rooted out of our society and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law for fueling hate. There is no place in any civilized society for their ilk. This is by Keith Harmon, the national commander of the Veterans of Foreign Wars. They issued it as a press release today. I'm assuming it's also on their website at vfw.org. So there's that. Another story that, well, actually, let me just follow up on this. The Run Them Down. Henry Graybar wrote a fascinating piece that is on Slate, slate.com. And it's titled, Run Them Down, Driving into Crowds of Protesters Was a Right-Wing Fantasy Long Before the Violence in Charlottesville. And it starts out with a quote from ISIS's magazine Rumiyah from last November. Quote, though being an essential part of modern life, very few actually comprehend the deadly and destructive capability of the motor vehicle and its capacity for reaping large numbers of casualties if used in a premeditated manner. So ISIS is using cars to kill people, and they've done this in a half a dozen or more cities. Run them over. These are just a few quotes here from Henry Graybar's piece. I encourage you to go over to slate.com and check this out. Run them over is a popular and anti-Black Lives Matter catchphrase. Even police officers have felt comfortable expressing this sentiment in public. In July 2016, after a week during which Alton Sterling and Philando Castile were shot and killed by police, and Micah Xavier Johnson killed 5 Dallas police officers in an apparent act of revenge, an Oregon police officer was fired after he posted a photo of Black Lives Matter protest and wrote, quote, when encountering such mobs, remember there are 3 pedals on your floor. Push the right one all the way down. In January 2016, a police sergeant in St. Paul, Minnesota, was suspended after allegedly posting a comment on an article about MLK Day, instructing drivers, quote, run them over, keep traffic flowing, and don't slow down for any of these idiots who try and block the street. This February, Troy Baker, president of the police union in Santa Fe, New Mexico, shared an image from the Prepare to Take America Back Facebook page, a right-wing meme factory. Quote, all lives splatter. Nobody cares about your protest, it reads over an image of a Jeep plowing through a crowd. On July 10th, 2016, the same day a South Carolina fire captain threatened to run over Black Lives Matter protesters who had shut down Interstate 126, an SUV driver in southern Illinois plowed through a group of BLM protesters after yelling, all lives matter, not blacks, all lives. 2 days earlier, a driver had accelerated into a crowd of protesters outside the police department in Ferguson, Missouri. In January 2015, a Minneapolis driver lurched into a Ferguson solidarity rally and ran over a 16-year-old girl. Across the country, Republican legislators have attempted to codify the idea that protesters surrender their rights when they stand on the road. And then he talks about Keith Kempenich, Kempenich, a trucking company CEO and North Dakota state legislator, who has proposed a bill in the North Dakota House of Representatives to give immunity to drivers who unintentionally hit pedestrians on the road. The North Carolina House approved a similar bill in April. Lawmakers in Texas and Florida have proposed the same. And by the way, after Heather Heyer was killed, a Massachusetts patrolman commented on Facebook, ha ha ha, love this. Maybe people shouldn't block roadways.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Running them down is not something new, and it's not just ISIS that's doing it. It's also the Klan, it's the alt-right in the United States.
Welcome to the Thom Hartmann Book Club. Today we're reading from Hannah Arendt's book, The Origins of Totalitarianism. And I've, known about this book, read little pieces of it for decades. I mean, it's the classic work on totalitarianism. It's long and there's a lot of words in it. But for this moment, Elliot Lustig was tweeting recently about Donald Trump. This is back when Donald Trump was talking about 3 to 5 million illegal immigrants voting, right? And he said, Hannah Arendt, in her book, The Origin of Totalitarianism, provides a helpful guide for interpreting the language of fascists. She noted how decent liberals of 1930s Germany would fact-check the Nazis' bizarre claims about things like Jews as if they were meant to be factual. What they failed to understand, Arendt suggests, is that the Nazi Jew-hating was not a statement of fact, but a declaration of intent. So when someone would blame the Jews for Germany's defeat in World War I, naive people would counter by saying, there's no evidence of that. What the Nazis were doing was not describing what was true, but what would have to be true in order to justify what they planned to do next. So did 3 million illegals cast vote in the election? Clearly not, but fact-checking is just a way of playing along with their game. What Trump is saying is not that 3 million illegals voted. What he's saying is, I'm going to steal the voting rights of millions of Americans. So that's kind of a contemporary frame for this book. So let's read from the book itself. Here, this is from page 348. And she's talking about totalitarian movements and how they use propaganda, how they communicate with the public, and the difference between terror and propaganda, the kind of terror that they can inculcate by just kind of randomly arresting people. Pretty much everybody's committed some kind of crime at some point, right? Arresting people, and on the one hand, that's the terror, or convincing the people. These totalitarian movements use socialism and racism by emptying them of their utilitarian content, the interests of a class or a nation. The form of infallible protection in which these concepts were presented has become more important than their content. The chief qualification of a mass leader has become unending infallibility. He can never admit an error. The assumption of infallibility, moreover, is based not so much on superior intelligence as on the correct interpretation of the essentially reliable forces in history and nature, forces which neither defeat nor ruin, can prove wrong because they're bound to assert themselves in the long run. Mass leaders in power have one concern which overrides all utilitarian consideration: to make their predictions come true. The Nazis did not hesitate to use, at the end of the war, the concentrated force of their still intact organization to bring about as complete a destruction of Germany as possible, in order to make true their prediction that the German people would be ruined in case of defeat. The propaganda effect of infallibility, the striking success of posing as a mere interpreting agent of predictable forces, has encouraged in totalitarian dictators the habit of announcing their political intentions in the form of prophecy. The most famous example is Hitler's announcement to the German Reichstag in January 1939, quote, "I want today once again to make a prophecy. In case the Jewish financiers succeed one more in hurling the people into a world war, the result will be the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe," end of quote. Translated into non-totalitarian language, this means, I intend to make war and I intend to kill the Jews of Europe. Similarly, Stalin, in the great speech before the Central Committee of the Communist Party in 1930, in which he prepared the physical liquidation of intra-party right and left deviationists, described them as representatives of dying classes. This definition not only gave the argument its specific sharpness, but also announced in totalitarian style the physical destruction of those whose dying out had just been prophesied. In both instances, the same objective is accomplished. The liquidation is fitted into a historical process in which man not only suffers, or does or suffers what, according to some immutable law, is bound to happen anyway. As soon as the execution of the victims has been carried out, the prophecy becomes a retrospective alibi. Nothing happened but what has already been predicted. It does not matter whether the laws of history spell the doom of the classes and their representatives, or whether the laws of nature exterminate all those elements, democracies, Jews, Eastern subhumans, the Untermenschen, or the incurably sick. They are not fit to live anyway. Incidentally, Hitler, too, spoke of dying classes that ought to be, quote, eliminated without much ado, end quote. This method, like other totalitarian propaganda methods, is foolproof only after the movements have seized power. Then all debate about the truth or falsity of a totalitarian dictator's prediction is as weird as arguing with a potential murderer about whether his future victim is dead or alive, since by killing the person in question, the murderer can provide prompt proof of the correctness of his statement. The only valid argument under such conditions is promptly to rescue the person whose death has been predicted. Before mass leaders seize the power to fit reality to their lies, their propaganda is marked by its extreme contempt for facts as such, For, in their opinion, fact depends entirely on the power of the man who can fabricate it. The assertion that the Moscow subway is the only one in the world is a lie only so long as the Bolsheviks have not the power to destroy all the others. In other words, the method of infallible prediction, more than any other totalitarian propaganda device, works. In the book, Hannah Arendt, The Origins of Totalitarianism.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And the activists, people are starting to take things into their own hands, which may or may not be a good idea. I understand that there is some very aggressive action in some of the states to try to prosecute anybody who damages a Confederate statue here in the United States. These are our Nazis, right? These are the people who celebrate slaveholding and whatnot. But there was a group of activists who took down a statue in, where was this, Nate? North Carolina. Thank you. Here's the clip of it. They're pulling it right down off the top there, bang, right onto the ground. It collapses the whole thing, and everybody's cheering. And this is... Yeah, and people coming up and kicking it and whatnot. And this is white people kicking it, as well as, people of color there. But it's people are waking up. People are saying enough of this already. It was a celebration, tearing down a Confederate statue. On the other hand, some of those people might end up, facing charges for this, which, that's I suppose the risk you take when you seek to protest. A couple of other things that I wanted to make you aware of before moving on to picking up your phone calls. Project435.com. Write this down, check it out. And in fact, let's see if there's a retweet on their page here. There isn't. So I guess I can I'm going to tweet this right now, just for anybody who wants to go looking for it. And check this out. Oops. Check this out. And here it is. And I'm tweeting it right now. Project 435 is, they have pointed out, .com, a whole bunch of places around the United States where Republicans are running without a Democratic challenger. 2 different congressional districts in Alabama, 1 in Florida, 1 in Georgia, 1 in Idaho, 1 in Illinois, 1 in Indiana, 2 in Kansas, 1 in Kentucky, 5 in Louisiana, 2 in Michigan, 2 in Mississippi, 2 in Missouri, 1 in Nebraska, 1 in New York, 2 in North Carolina, 1 in North Dakota, 2 in Ohio, 4 in Oklahoma, 2 in Pennsylvania, 4 in South Carolina, 3 in Tennessee, 1 in Texas, 2 in Utah, 2 in Virginia, 1 in West Virginia, 2 in Wisconsin, and 1 in Wyoming. Yes, in Wyoming, Dick Cheney's daughter is running without Democratic opposition, at least so far. So what Project 435 is the number of people who are in Congress, right? 435, members of Congress, and this is an attempt to recruit Democrats to run for these seats. And when you click on your state, if you click on Wisconsin, it'll take you to the Wisconsin Democratic Party's site where you can say, hey, I'm interested in running. I've been thinking, this is kind of cool. So I'm interested in running on this. So just FYI, I just wanted to give you a heads up on it. It's a fabulous website. Finally, the last thing I wanted to share with you before I start picking up your phone calls. The Department of Justice. Not only has Jeff Sessions sent a private letter. It's not been publicly released to the best of my knowledge. We know about this through people on the staffs of the Republicans that he sent it to. He sent it to Republicans in the House and Senate who are on the appropriations committees, the people who are responsible for appropriating money, because right now, and this is running out this year, right now the federal government is banned from appropriating money to enforce anti-marijuana laws against states or individuals that have medical marijuana provisions. Okay, so he's doing that. He's trying to take down medical marijuana. Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III. But this is the other mind-boggling thing that DreamHost is an internet service provider and host a web hosting company. They host websites. And last year they hosted a website on which, not DreamHost, but a third party, put together a website to help coordinate people who are coming to Washington, D.C. on inaugural day to protest Donald Trump's inauguration. 1.3 million people used this website to find out what was going on here in Washington, D.C., or to sign up or say, I want to participate. 1.3 million people. Might be you. The Justice Department has said, we want those IP addresses. Once they have your IP address, they have your name, they have your address, they have your phone number. They can go back to your internet service provider, get your billing information, your social security number, everything. The Justice Department may be coming for you under Jefferson Beauregard Sessions. Heads up. Richard in Ypsilanti, Michigan. Hey, Richard, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I just want to point out you've been talking about monuments to Confederate generals in the South, Mike. But I don't know how many people are aware, but we've got at least 5 Army installations in the South that are named for Confederate generals.
Oh, and highways and roads. And I lived in Atlanta for 13 years. They're all over the place.
Yeah.
And that, you do not see Hitler Street in Dresden or in Frankfurt or, Munich. You're not going to find a Goebbels Avenue. but Robert E. Lee roads are all over the place. Back to you, Richard.
These are federal installations. These are Army installations.
Yeah, which is crazy.
Fort Bragg and Fort Jackson, Fort Hood, even Fort Lee in Virginia.
Wow. So those are all Confederate generals. This is, it's time for us to put this part of our history behind us. It was time to do it in the 1860s and the 1870s, but that got blown up. But it's way past time. Richard, thanks for sharing that. That's a very interesting and insightful comment. Thank you. Gwendolyn in Rialto, California. Hey, Gwendolyn, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi, Tom. This is my call. Listen, I know in the beginning of all Trump, before he became inaugurated, he laid a plan down. And
Gwendolyn, I can't hear you. I'm going to put you on hold. You're breaking up. And Chris will pick up the call. She's on line 4, Chris. And maybe we can figure out how to make your phone work a little better. But I'm sorry, I can't hear what you're saying. Bob in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Hey, Bob, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Heads up, yeah. I'd like to speak to the truth and irony of what's going on with current issues. You speak of Jeff Sessions at a time when all this is going on. We see the statues being torn down, and it's the whole spectrum of Jim Crow needs to be discussed in regards to the whole economy, the whole culture. There's a lot of things being left out. He says he's coming after the marijuana users and that good people don't smoke marijuana, but if we check our history, that's just a bold-faced lie. And if we check the current situation, we see a marijuana industry that's budding and growing and doing quite well where it's allowed to, with very few negative repercussions. And at the same time, you speak of veterans. I'd like to bring to your attention a brave veteran who, back in 2000, I don't know exactly, a few years back, in southeast Colorado, a veteran took his old family farm and started growing hemp, industrial hemp. Mm-hmm. Nobody covers it. The Farm Bureau covered it at the time. Yeah. How many other people are trying to do that? Why doesn't the government support farmers growing hemp and then passing legislation that keeps Monsanto's hands off the seed so they can't make a terminator gene in the seed that destroys everybody's marijuana plant?
Bob, as you well know, the reason the government doesn't do that is because in blowing up the clean government laws that were passed in 73 and 74 after the Nixon scandals, the Supreme Court has not only allowed billionaires to own politicians, but has allowed industries to serve in government. And that's what's going on. Bob, thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Jeff Merkley, by the way, has been a real champion, a good guy in this stuff, the senator from Oregon, in proposing legislation to protect medical marijuana. And welcome back. Gwendolyn in Rialto, California. Gwendolyn, let's try it again. Is your phone working any better?
Oh, I hope so. Can you hear me?
I hear you
now?
fine now, yeah.
Great. Well, listen, I've just been following you from the very beginning of Trump reign, and you read out of books in terms of the history, how Nazi began in Germany.
Yeah.
And you're right on target. So I would love for you to put us through that again to where we are in that process.
Oh, you're talking about when I was reading from Milton Mayer's They Thought They Were Free book about
Correct,
how... Yeah.
Correct. And you're right on target because you point out some issues that were coming about during his reign, and we're right there now. So I would like you to brief us on how much more you're looking for in the future in terms of where we're going with this fascism.
Well, I think the biggest lesson, Gwendolyn, that I learned from both reading The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William Scherer and reading They Thought They Were Free by Milton Mayer was that it was incremental. That in 1932, nobody would have predicted that there would be, concentration camps or death camps, killing Jews and gypsies and gay people and communists and whatnot. Or very few people would have predicted that. Which is why so many Jews stayed in Germany in the early 30s. They just figured, this will pass. This guy's just a crazy guy. He's just a populist. He's saying awful stuff, but, that's not going to go anywhere. Don't worry about it. And every step that Hitler took and every step that, led right up to 1939. In fact, yesterday I was reading a piece about how in 1939, most Germans didn't think that Germany was going to go to war. This was just before Hitler invaded Poland. And of course, that worked out a little differently than they expected. So it's the thing that was happening in Germany that Milton Mayer just lays out so brilliantly, and They Thought They Were Free, is that many Germans who were offended by what Hitler was doing were simply waiting for him to do something so outrageous that everybody would rise up. And instead of doing one giant thing that was that outrageous, there were 1,000 little tiny steps that led to that point. And so there was never that point where it was like, oh my God, we've got to get in the streets and protest this. And then, of course, dissent got criminalized in late 33 or 34. And once that happened, then you had the White Rose Society emerge, the student movement. And then you had Hitler murder those people later on in the 30s. I mean, it was just, it was... And you look at, the Justice Department demanding 1.3 million IPs related to the Trump resistance. And it's like, and this is an article in The Hill, thehill.com. It's like, whoa, we are traveling down not the same road as Germany traveled. We're not Germany. And, we don't have the exact same sensibilities, and history is not the same as it was in 1932. And we do have some benefit of hindsight that was unavailable to people in the 30s. It actually happened, but we're still traveling down a very, very similar road, and it scares the heck out of me. And I think it should concern all of us. And everybody seems to be waiting for that one great moment. And I don't think that one great moment is going to come. I think it's all this incremental stuff. It's just step by step by step. Gwendolyn, thank you for the call. And yes, one of these days I will dig out Milton Mayer's book and I'll reread some of that material to you all. Just don't like to do it too often. It's been, I think, less than a month. Ellen Ratner with Talk Media News is up next. Stick around. Welcome back. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by Loving What You Do, a new book by Ellen Ratner, and goatsfortheoldgoat.com. And on the line with us is Ellen Ratner herself. Hey, Helen, I hope you are well.
Thank you so much. You know what's fascinating is I absolutely agree with you. It's kind of like a frog in water, when you turn up the heat and the frog doesn't know what's going on.
Yeah, I was just saying there hasn't been this one great, perhaps Charlottesville is almost a tipping point, but there hasn't been this one great moment where everybody rises up. And that's what the Germans kept waiting for from 32 until 39. They kept waiting for that one great moment. And then when it came, when, the war, the invasion of Poland, it was too late to do anything because dissent had been criminalized. But back to you, Ellen.
Absolutely. Okay. So the president today is expected to make an announcement on infrastructure. We do know that Treasury Secretary Mnuchin went to Trump Tower today. We know that one of the things he's going to be talking about in terms of infrastructure is compressing the time on evaluation rules, and this is evaluation on things like on environmental impact, et cetera. So that's a very big concern. That's expected to happen at 3:45 Eastern today. Excuse me. Also, we do know that although he removed it very, very quickly, Trump he emailed out this morning or texted what's that thing called he does tweeted. So, yes, he tweeted out a train running over, the Trump train running over a fake CNN reporter.
Right.
Very interesting. Today, CNN, apparently, this was put out in a Donald Trump fundraiser, that they did not allow an ad. They said CNN did not allow an ad for Donald Trump, and they said that this campaign ad was released on Sunday, was blocked by the network. However, CNN did do a story on it today, so that's kind of interesting.
You mean they wouldn't take Trump's campaign money?
They wouldn't take Trump's campaign money. I'd take it.
That's strange. That's strange.
Right? This is the second time, apparently, they haven't taken it. I'd take it. I'd take any money I can from him.
Yeah. Very interesting.
I mean,
Yeah, on the other hand, I saw the ad. I saw it on YouTube yesterday. It's a pretty strong, it's almost a Ronald Reagan kind of pro-Trump ad.
Right. President Trump's plan is working is the title of the ad.
Yes, yeah, and that's what they're saying.
Okay. So today is also the 5th anniversary of the enactment of what's called DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. 800,000 children have been helped by this act. However, they're afraid that it might go down in court because they said the makeup of the court hearing the case and its previous record against a parents program would likely strike down DACA. It might go to the Supreme Court. We just don't know. Okay. Also, Roman Polanski, my friend Gloria Allred, you know her too. And as you know, she gets on top of all the women's issues. She said one more woman has come on and said that Roman Polanski abused her, and she was victimized. As you know, Roman Polanski has not been back to the United States since he was accused, and he is wanted apparently now on an international warrant.
Uh-oh. Okay.
Yeah. Once you get that, they're going to get you at some point, I think.
Yeah, he's been hiding out in Europe all these years.
That's right.
Or living in Europe, hiding out.
Car murderer from Charlottesville, Virginia. His father lives, I believe, in Fargo, North Dakota. He wrote in the newspaper today, I, along with all of his siblings and his entire family, wish to loudly repudiate my son's vile, hateful, and racist rhetoric and actions. We do not know specifically where he learned these beliefs. He did not learn them at home. Then he also said, please, son, renounce the hate, accept, and love all.
Yeah, it was brilliant. I read that on the air yesterday. That's got to be a tough thing for a father to say.
Well, the newspaper put it in today, so yeah. Okay. Now, also, this is not good. Somebody actually doctored a photo of themselves with the president and this a white supremacist by the name of Millennial Matt. It's made its round around the internet. However, it is a complete fake photo.
Okay.
Also, the question is whether President Trump will pardon former Sheriff Arpaio. As you know, he was convicted of just stopping people that he thought were immigrants, et cetera, and giving them tickets and putting them in jail. He had retweeted a Fox News story today, and, you know, Arpaio lost for re-election recently, but he's 85 years old. I mean, you know, I guess I'm a spiritualist. I don't believe in putting 85-year-old people in jail, even though Arpaio is a bad human being.
I wouldn't have a problem with it personally.
No, okay.
Back to you.
I can't deal with jail, but okay, unless you're violent.
Arpaio ran jails. He humiliated people. He tortured people.
And he put people in pink underwear and tents.
I know.
And all. I mean, I actually interviewed him at one of the Republican conventions. I mean, and he was arrogant and horrible, and everything that they say about him is true.
Yeah.
Okay. Kim Jong-un had outlined a plan to hit Guam today. And by the way, 2 Guam radio stations, neither one of which I had ever been on because I was on a Guam radio station for about 10 years, put out a fake air raid in the middle of the night, and they didn't realize that they were doing it. But he then said later on today, after he outlined this plan, and he has a baton pointing out to a map reading Strategic Forces Firing Strike Plan, and then he showed his plan out to everybody. But then he later said he wasn't going to fire missiles at this time. Now, the Secretary of Defense, our Secretary of Defense in the good old USA, said that the military is preparing to intercept any kind of missile if it was fired.
Yeah.
So I guess we believe we have the capacity to do so.
Wow. It'll be interesting to see. I mean, but yeah, okay.
Okay, in the morning tweet storm, of which Donald Trump does a lot in the mornings, he went after the Merck, I'm not pronouncing it right, Merck, Under Armour, and Intel CEOs, who, as you know, left his White House advisory councils, and he basically said that they were grandstanders, and he said that he had many people to take their place.
We'll see how this works out, but this is just a, it's kind of a symbolic thing anyway. I don't think this committee has even met, has it? Have they?
I don't even know that they've met, and if they certainly met, they met in private. They didn't do a news conference afterwards. They didn't come out to the White House microphones. They didn't do anything like that. So it looks good to say that you've met, and maybe you have a contact at the White House who can put you in touch with everybody. Which is what they often do. So this is not uncommon in any White House, be it Bush or Obama or Clinton. So they nominate a committee. The committee either meets or doesn't meet. It doesn't really matter. And then they have a liaison in the press that gets them invited to the White House Christmas party or 4th of July. And that's really the sum total of it. It's not a big deal, I don't think. And I don't think it really has a lot of influence.
Yep. Agreed.
Okay. One little last story here, and I don't know how much time we have, but...
I just have to share something with you. You were telling me about North Korea. There's a spoof DPRK news service Twitter feed. It's DPRK_news, as in Democratic People's Republic of Korea, which is the official name of North Korea.
Right.
They tweeted out 2 things this morning. The first was, Marshal Kim Jong-un to blot out sun over skies of United States on August 21st, 2017, in awesome display of DPRK space power. And the second was, esteemed General Kim Jong-un reprieves U.S. colony of Guam, citing concern for ocelots and sea turtles. Fate of Los Angeles remains unclear.
That's hilarious. And, of course, the first one is the day that the eclipse is supposed to happen.
Right, exactly. That's the whole point of it. Yep. Kim Jong-un is going to darken the skies.
Right. Okay. Tom Cole, who's a congressman from Oklahoma, he said, I don't think the president is some sort of closet racist who's deliberately stirring up the devils of our nature. But he said, we're all singing from the same songbook now, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. If only we were. Ellen Ratner, thank you, Ellen.
Thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit tomsbeets.com. And it's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today I'm reading from The Prophet's Way, A Guide to Living in the Now. It's actually a compilation of mostly, there's some commentary in there, but mostly it's diaries and letters that I sent to friends on travels around the world, and it's kind of a autobiography, I suppose, of sorts. This is from chapter, I don't know what the chapter number is. It's titled Life in a Teepee. It's on page 25. And it starts with a quote from Lenny Bruce. Every day people are straying away from the church and going back to God. My best friend through school was Clark Stinson. We met when we were 13, and instead of pursuing the normal pastimes of teenagers, we spent our time studying Sanskrit. We had an old study guide book I found in my father's library, reading the Tibetan Book of the Dead and arguing minutiae from the Bible. Clark's mother was interested in metaphysics and shared a book called Autobiography of a Yogi with us. Years later, when I went to Detroit with her and Clark to attend an initiation in Kriya Yoga by Yogacharya Oliver Black, the oldest living disciple of Yogananda, I recognized Yogananda's Kriya technique as identical to an ancient Coptic exercise Master Stanley had taught us years earlier called the Cobra Breath. I introduced Clark to Master Stanley and Lee, and Clark and I began a serious study of spirituality. We were both in our late teens by then, and Clark had recently married. I was recovering from a painful breakup with a girlfriend, and we agreed that to do our spiritual work best, we should seek isolation. So Clark and his wife bought a teepee, and I bought one, and we three gave away everything else we owned in the world except some clothes and our spiritual books. We bought 100 pounds of wheat, 100 pounds of dried fruits, some basic camping equipment, and got a ride up into Michigan's Upper Peninsula, where an old trapper led us on a 3-day trek back into the Chippewa National Forest to a small lake that isn't on most maps. We spent the summer there, Clark and his wife on one side of the lake, me on the other. 3 days a week, we practiced silence and did meditation and prayer every day for hours. I had a pet tachinid fly, a small insect that looks like a honeybee but is actually a fly. When I'd meditate in the morning on my blanket outside my teepee, he'd come and hover just over my right hand as if he were drawing nourishment from me. Sometimes he'd hover there for as much as 20 minutes. Occasionally, he'd land and walk around with careful steps like an astronaut exploring a distant but friendly planet. I also shared my teepee with a large and furry brown and black wolf spider who came out at night as the sun set and picked the sleeping mosquitoes off the canvas on the west side of my teepee. I watched the play of life and death, predator and prey. Here's an odd synchronicity that Carl Jung would have appreciated. I haven't seen a tachinid fly for years, but as I'm typing these words into a laptop computer on my back porch in Atlanta, one just hovered over my left hand for a few moments and then landed. He's here with me as I'm typing, sitting on my hand. One cold and rainy afternoon, Clark and I were walking through the woods looking for berries and edible plants. We'd gotten pretty skilled at identifying what was safe and what wasn't, and we're filling a bag with leaves and fruits. This must be what our ancestors lived like, Clark observed, hunting and gathering. Except we're vegetarians, so we're just gathering, I said, joking. But to Clark, it wasn't a joke. Seriously, what we call civilization started when humans started farming. But humans like us were around for tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of years before that, fully conscious, awake, aware, thinking and feeling just like us. But they were hunters and gatherers instead of farmers. I said, without agriculture, there'd be no civilization. It was an interesting thought. Remember Miss Hemmer? Clark said. Miss Hemmer had been our 8th grade biology teacher and one of the best teachers I'd ever known in my life. Clark and I had conspired to make her life difficult, but we also loved her and learned more from her each month than from any of our other teachers in a year. And she was a huge fan of Margaret Mead.
Clark said, she said that in primitive societies, there isn't suicide, depression, drug addiction, all that stuff. The noble savage, I said, shivering. I'm skeptical and cold. And the Indians who lived here once were probably cold, too. He shrugged and said, this life seems much more natural to me. At least I had to agree with that. A few days later, Clark came running over to my teepee with his Bible, all excited. Look at this, he said, pointing to Genesis 4:2. It says, Cain was a tiller of the ground. The Bible is talking about how the first murderer was also the first farmer. And in the 25th verse, it makes it clear that Abel, the brother who was not the farmer, was the one who loved God the most. So what, I said. It's a classic archetype of the oldest child being the most beloved, but also the one who screws up. It's all over, from Greek mythology to Shakespeare. Don't you see, Clark said? Adam and Eve were gatherers like we are now. They walked around the Garden of Eden and picked up food. But then they tasted of the knowledge of good and evil, of life and death. That's your food supply. You live or die by it. When you live as a gatherer, you live by a whim of nature. If there's no food, you die. When you begin to store up food, you can defy nature and survive a drought. You then have the power to control life, the knowledge of life or death, or good and evil. So the tasting of the apple must have meant that Adam and Eve experimented with agriculture, and in doing so, they defied the God of nature. It's a warning. It's saying that the primitive life of hunting, gathering, and herding was more in accord with nature's way than is agriculture. Clark dove deep into the issue, but I didn't consider it all that important at the time. I couldn't see how when people started farming after the end of the Ice Age, it had been such a bad thing. After all, it brought us modern society and science. Clark, however, was totally certain that agriculture and what he called the organized ones were responsible for the coming death of the earth. The book, The Prophet's Way.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us is one of the finest investigative reporters working in the United States, Lee Fang, the investigative reporter with The Intercept. TheIntercept.com is the website. You can tweet him at LHFANG or at The Intercept. And Lee, welcome back to the program. It's been too long since we've had you on.
It's been way too long, Tom. Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to hear your voice, my friend. You wrote a piece that it just dropped my jaw when I read it. It was published a couple days ago, as I recall, over at theintercept.com. The title of it was "Sphere of Influence: How American Libertarians Are Remaking Latin American Politics." We've seen the kind of libertarian takeover of the Republican Party, or infiltration of the Republican Party, here in the United States, but Latin America, tell us the story.
This is really the first look at a group called the Atlas Network. This organization has been around since the early 80s, but essentially their purpose is to take these successful economic hard-right strategies for implementing those types of policies in the United States and the UK, and to duplicate that method that we've seen over the last 30 or 40 years here in country after country all over the world. Our piece takes a special focus on their efforts in Latin America, but what they've done is essentially taken the model of groups like the Heritage Foundation and the Cato Institute and their kind of orbit of media outlets and duplicated this process in countries like Brazil and Argentina, but also in Eastern Europe and other parts of the developing world.
So, to the best of my knowledge, there has never been a successful country, county, state, municipality that has operated along libertarian lines. Please correct me if I'm wrong. There have been a number of attempts, you know, the experiment with Chile that Milton Friedman was behind, the Donald Rumsfeld and L. Paul Bremer in Iraq, you know, literally closing down the entire government, believing that the free market would magically fill that space. That didn't work out so well. But what's, you know, the way libertarianism seems to play out in the United States is it just moves us in the direction of oligarchy. What's the end game in Latin America, and what do you think about my analysis of this?
Well, in one respect, this is kind of a long-running debate that kind of predates all these terms that we use, like neoliberalism or economic libertarianism. There's been an effort by the very wealthy in society to grab the gains of a society and keep it for themselves. So these libertarian policies of tax cuts for the rich, mass privatization, attacks on voting and kind of mass democracy and labor unions. It's nothing new, but what the Atlas Network provides is kind of the institutes that provide credibility for these ideas. These institutes are kind of designed to look very academic. They provide kind of an ideological and academic veneer to these ideas so that they seem more popular than they really are, and that allows usually conservative politicians in these countries to then point to these third-party institutions and say, if we're going to privatize, the pension system, or we're going to privatize prisons and the education system, as they're trying to do in Brazil now, these aren't ideas that simply benefit the very wealthy. Here's an independent third-party group that's making the recommendation. And just like in the United States, there's kind of dark money financing efforts by the very wealthy and large industrial conglomerates to prop up these institutes. But for the general public and for the media, it's very convenient to see kind of like what looks like a credible third-party think tank that's providing these ideas and producing policy papers.
Is this is it mostly Central and South American billionaires and multimillionaires who are financing this, or is it American billionaires and multimillionaires?
Yeah, that's a very interesting dynamic. There's been, and this, my piece kind of touches on the financing. We don't know the exact financing for every single one of these institutes, but we've figured out that despite all their anti-government rhetoric, that the State Department and USAID, the foreign aid arm of the U.S. government, has quietly partnered with libertarian billionaires like the Koch brothers in the United States to work through the Atlas Network to provide financing and startup financing to these Latin American think tanks, and they train the leaders of these local institutes to then also rely on local financing from businesses in their home countries. So it's really a mix. It's a mix of very kind of politically active foundations in the United States. It's the State Department, which is funding these institutes to kind of shape countries to be more friendly to U.S. interests, and local businessmen from wherever the institute is based. So in Brazil, they're working with a lot of the economic elite in that country. But for the think tanks in Chile, they mix in financing from local businesses there.
Does this have to do, or what does this have to do, I guess, with the overthrow of the president of Brazil recently, what's going on in Venezuela, the rise of right-wing governments? I mean, to what extent is this ideology actually fueling regime change or something close to it, as opposed to simply pushing government policies in one direction or the other?
Well, it's important to kind of acknowledge that there's no one dynamic driving the kind of political shifts that we're seeing in Latin America right now. It's really a mix. And this is the kind of argument that the president of the Atlas Network, Alex Chafflin, made to me when I interviewed him. He can't take responsibility for the drop in commodity prices that has led to a lot of, instability. He can't take full responsibility for the political scandals that have kind of swept countries like Brazil. But what he can do is, provide a network of institutes that are all working together, that when these crises do arise, can take advantage of them to push ideas that were once on the margins of society into the mainstream. So in Brazil, their economy has had a downturn because of lower commodity prices. There's been the sprawling corruption scandal that has touched every single major political party, including the conservative parties. But a new Atlas Network-backed group of think tanks and institutes, about 13 of them in Brazil, have channeled public outrage only on the leftist politicians, only on Dilma Rousseff, and basically made the argument that the only way to fix Brazil is to get rid of socialist policies and to ignore, the corruption scandals that have affected the conservative parties, and to only get to encourage people to only get angry at politicians connected to the Workers' Party in Brazil. So they've really kind of skillfully exploited this crisis for their own political goals.
How is this different from the shock doctrine that Naomi Klein wrote about a number of years ago?
Well, there are many kind of interesting connections to that. The Atlas Network was founded in 1981, and what Naomi Klein writes about is how with the military coup and Operation Condor in countries like Chile, and the kind of attempt by libertarian economists from the University of Chicago to go down and use these countries in crisis as petri dishes to experiment with these massive libertarian policies. The book is brilliant, and I recommend any of your listeners to read it. Well, the Atlas Network years later came in to try to these very same countries, including Chile, working with those same group of University of Chicago economists to set up institutes to continue those reforms, to ensure that the ideas that were experimented with under Pinochet, for example, would be continued to be pushed even after Pinochet left. So, Chile had a big presidential election this year. Sebastián Peña, the very conservative candidate, has actually leaned on the same set of University of Chicago-style libertarian think tanks in Chile to basically set up his cabinet of advisors, and his advisors have already said if Peña wins, he will lean on these same institutes to go back to these types of libertarian reforms.
Some year or two ago, Jimmy Carter was on this program, and I asked him what he thought about Citizens United and how it's affected democracy in the United States. And he said, I'm paraphrasing, but it's pretty close. It went viral. It's all easy to find on the internet. He said, basically, the United States is no longer a democracy. We are now an oligarchy with unlimited political bribery, thanks to the Supreme Court. I would argue that that is the outcome of libertarian policies. To what extent should we simply start referring to so-called libertarianism as oligarchy? I mean, is it not that?
No, I think we need a broader debate, because I think a lot of people, they take civil libertarian ideas like, ending the drug war and marriage equality, and they equate them with economic libertarian ideas, which are really, I think, from an intellectual basis, completely different. This is basically an attempt to rebrand old style ideas that are based in feudalism, that are based in a very hierarchical society, and we need a larger discussion about the problems we face. And unfortunately, I think the term libertarian throws people off because they mix up the economic libertarian side with civil libertarian side.
Yeah, and the economic libertarian side is really basically a scam, and the civil libertarian is, yeah, we'll throw you a bone. Gay people can get married. We don't care. It's not going to hurt the billionaires. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Get over to theintercept.com and read this piece, Sphere of Influence by Lee Fong, and check it out. This is absolutely brilliant reporting. Lee, thanks so much for being with us today.
Tom, thank you for having me. Take care.
Always great talking with you. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of the news of the day, your calls, my thoughts, and all of the above right after this. And welcome back. Wayne in Jacksonville, Illinois. Hey, Wayne, thanks for watching Free Speech on DirecTV. What's on your mind today?
Yes, while I was listening to your conversation with your first guest from Life After Hate, I was reminded of some YouTube footage I saw of James Baldwin a month or two ago. And I can't begin to quote him, but he made the point that had not occurred to me before, that when looking at racism, that if you set aside the injustice done to blacks and the tremendous harm, that that white people should still be interested in eliminating it, because it is simply a symptom of some deep underlying sickness in our culture that needs to be eradicated or healed or something.
Yeah.
And the gentleman you were talking to, I've forgotten his name, Tony, seemed to bring this home in a very significant way. And only while I've been waiting online, it's occurred to me that I would hope that all of our courageous brothers and sisters who take to the streets and counter-protest would take a look at whatever Life After Hate has to say, so that we can meet this hatred with compassion and a diffusing attitude, rather than the anger seems to be the knee-jerk reaction to it at all times, and my own included. But that's about the extent of what I have to say, I think.
Well, you said it very well, Wayne. Thank you very much. I completely agree, and at every level. And James Baldwin was brilliant. The movie about him, I believe it's called I Am Not Your Negro. Louise and I went to see that a month or 3 ago. It's brilliant. His writings are brilliant. I mean, the guy was a very consequential figure in the literary scene back in the day.
Watching that movie was what put me on something of a YouTube jag, picking up everything I could that he had to say. But there's a lot there to learn, and it looks like that, as I say, this Life After Hate is a very valuable resource that we should all be looking at.
Yeah. lifeafterhate.org, I believe. I'd have to check it. Hang on just a second here. Yeah, it was Tony McAleer, M-C-A-L-E-E-R, and he was the former organizer with the White Aryan Resistance, and currently lifeafterhate.org. He's currently the co-founder and the board chair. And what boggles my mind is that these guys have actually perfected essentially a system to bring neo-Nazis in from the cold, to bring them in and embrace them and turn them back into decent human beings. And the Obama administration funded this to the tune of $400,000. And Sebastian Gorka's wife, according to press reports, put the kibosh on that. Said, no, we're not going to fund anti-fascism. That's just not something the federal government should be doing. It's bizarre. Wayne, thank you for the call, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be back.
Hi, I'm Valerie with Free Speech TV. We're proud to provide you with independent, unfiltered news and documentaries. And as our valued viewer, you can help us continue bringing Free Speech TV well into the future. Join our Pearly Gate Rebels, our planned giving program. Your gift of any size will help ensure democracy endures through an informed citizenry. You can donate property, money, or assets. It's easy. My spouse and I are proud Pearly Gate Rebels. We're doing our part to ensure that Free Speech TV will be here to deliver thought-provoking news and information well into the future. Join us. Call 877-378-8669 or email me at valerie@freespeech.org. Rebel against media owned by billionaires and become one of our Pearly Gate Rebels today.
Boy, what a day. There's so much going on here. Mike in Fort Collins, Colorado. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind?
Well, I have a theory about all of the
these right-wing senators and congressmen denouncing Trump from what he said last weekend, and I think it's more self-preservation than anything.
Oh, it's half self-preservation, and in the case of people like Cory Gardner and Marco Rubio, half they want to run for president in 2 years, 3 years.
Right. Well, Cory Gardner was something that was a person that I wanted to bring up. A couple of weeks ago, the Denver Post had an article that basically said that the cows are coming home, or the chickens are coming home to roost for Gardner. And I think he's realizing that what he's said and done in the past is coming home to haunt him. They had a meeting with Gardner, Michael Bennett, Governor Hickenlooper, and Zinke down in Durango about the Gold King mine disaster here a couple of years ago, and nobody asked a question about the Gold King mine. They just peppered him with questions about the ACA. So I think he's realizing that his thoughts and actions of the past almost 2 years he's been in office are coming back to haunt him.
And let us not forget, I mean, when Cory Gardner was first running for the United States Senate, just prior to that, he had been an enthusiastic supporter of the personhood legislation. Personhood legislation basically says that, from the moment of conception, a fertilized egg is a human being, and it is murder to arguably take some kinds of birth control. It would outlaw actually most types of birth control. It would outlaw all forms of abortion. And Cory Gardner was right there with those guys. And in the week before the election, this just made me absolutely crazy. One of the conservative journalists on NPR, national political reporter who had to get a waiver to be a Fox contributor, she's so conservative, went on NPR and said, oh, Cory Gardner's not in favor of the personhood amendment. He's a rational, normal guy, and just whitewashed his background. And he won an election that was essentially a squeaker. And I think frankly, I think he won that because, NPR has a hell of a throw across the United States. And it just horrified me. I went off on it several days in a row, back then. But Cory Gardner is looking from here, and you live in Colorado. You tell me. He looks to me like he's just basically a naked opportunist. He'll say whatever it takes to get him elected.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that is absolutely right. And you'll notice that If you ever notice when the turtle speaks, the guy on the far left with the gray, with the salt and pepper hero, that's Gardner, who's sitting at
with Mitch McTurtle,
McCobb's shoulder, who sits at the turtle's shoulder.
Yeah. Yeah, he's it's amazing. I mean, he's a first-term senator, and how close to power he's got, and how quickly he's rising in the Republican Party. He's good-looking, he's white, he's got a good CV. Of course. Mike, thanks for the call. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
27 and a half minutes past the hour. We'll be back after this with more of your calls.
For the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading from a book written by my old friend, Dennis Weaver. He has passed away. I wrote the foreword to this book, just FYI. It's called All the World's a Stage, and it's Dennis's autobiography. Dennis Weaver, Chester and Gunsmoke, all that kind of stuff. He's talking about early in the Depression. This is from page 17. It's just kind of telling his early life. Early in the Depression, it became clear that people had to... He's talking about the 1930s, right? When he was a young boy. Early in the Depression, it became clear that people had to come together and support each other, or many would just not survive. Not being cooperative and neighborly was not an option. If our neighbors were in trouble, we would not think twice about helping them. We just did it. I remember a family named Hardy bought the 10 acres next to our farm. There was nothing on that land except woods. The men in the surrounding area got together on weekends to cut down the trees and made logs to build a house, a real log raising. Within 6 or 7 weekends, they built a log home for the Hardy family to live in and a shed for their cows. Children had lots of fun. We played games and jumped from stump to stump like leaping frogs while the men sawed logs and hammered nails. Ladies brought covered dishes of food like potato salad, baked beans, and Jell-O, and we had a picnic at lunchtime. It was a community thing, a gathering of friends, and to this day, I still carry the feeling with me. In those times and moments, despite the Depression, we thought we had the best of life, and in a way we really did. Life was simpler. We knew how good it felt to be neighborly, to share our lives with each other. The national economy was shredded due to the crash of 1929, but in our area, including parts of Missouri, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Texas, the problem was exacerbated by what was known as the Great Dust Bowl. Continuing droughts had dried up the earth, and the fierce winds picked up the defenseless soil and made huge clouds of thick, swirling dust. Visibility often shrunk to a few yards. Most skilled and determined farmers were humbled before its wrath. The nutritious topsoil was all blown away, and agriculture came to a screeching halt. At the time, I didn't understand it, but it's crystal clear to me now that our economy and our environment are interdependent. When the environment at that time was destroyed and the farmers could no longer farm, they weren't the only ones who suffered. The economic disaster for the farmers spread like a raging virus to carpenters, plumbers, shop owners, and even bankers. Okies by the thousand piled whatever possessions they could salvage into cars, trucks, any jalopy that would run, and headed for California, which Dust Bowl victims considered to be the land of milk and honey. Perhaps the only one who profited from the Dust Bowl was John Steinbeck when he wrote The Grapes of Wrath. Because of the Dust Bowl, our farm was not financially successful. It certainly helped to feed the family, but the extra income my folks had hoped it would generate did not materialize. Mom, always trying to find a way out, heard from neighbors who had fled the Dust Bowl and our devastated economy earlier that the strawberry picking was good in Oregon. There was money to be made just for the picking. So we gave up on the farm and moved back to my birthplace in Joplin, 619 Brownell, to get ready for the trek west. Furthest west I'd ever been was Blackwell, Oklahoma. Would I see a real live cowboy? I wondered. What would Oregon be like? I might even see the Pacific Ocean. Our budget for the trip was minimal at best. Like the pioneers who crossed the Great Plains 100 years earlier, we were obliged to carry our own supplies because motels and restaurants were out of the question. Unlike those earlier settlers, the horses that carried us were not hitched to a wagon, but were under the hood of a 1928 DeSoto. Our plan was simple. Mom, Howard, Mary Ann, 2 years old by this time, Jerry, Denzel, Bell, and I would go to Oregon and pick strawberries and do what other jobs we could get. We would save our earnings and come back to Joplin in time for Howard and me to go back to school. Dad would stay behind, keep his job at the Empire District, and serve as a safety net for us. In case we broke down or got stranded, he could bail us out. Denzel was a carpenter by trade. He put his skills to good use. He built a cupboard on the back of Old Betsy, our DeSoto, where we could store an ample supply of canned goods and food staples. By releasing a fastener, the backside of the cupboard opened up and a leg swung down to support it, and lo and behold, we had a table on which to prepare the food and off of which we could eat. We jammed the storeroom with supplies, gave Old Betsy a final mechanical check, said our farewells, and headed west for the wild blue yonder. Although she never hinted at it, I'm sure Mom must have had a few qualms and trepidations. For me, it was just the beginning of what I imagined to be a great adventure. We started out for Oregon in the late spring of 1934. In those days, there were no 4-lane interstates, just 2-lane roads that were often in need of repair and full of detours. Our top speed was 40 miles an hour, so driving to Oregon was no walk in the park. Not long after crossing into Colorado from Kansas, we could see on the horizon what looked like a triangular cloud. It was strange because, like the other clouds moved, this one didn't budge. We used it as a guiding star for more than 2 hours before we realized it wasn't a cloud at all. It was the snow-capped top of Pikes Peak. As we drove deeper and deeper into the Rocky Mountains, I was moved more and more by their sheer beauty and breathtaking grandeur. It was awesome. I loved the majestic granite mountains, the tall pines, the quaking aspens, the crisp, dry air. It was all very magical to me. I guess I'm back in Colorado today because I was so impressed with it as a child. I was not only impressed by the beauty, but by what it had to offer. This was the first time I'd ever seen a real live working cowboy, and it was the first time I'd ever seen a real deer. We were driving over Wolf Creek Pass at dusk, coming around a bend, and there, right in front of us, was this wild deer running down the road in and out of the shadows. The book, All the World's a Stage, Dennis Weaver's autobiography. The foreword by Thom Hartmann.
News pile here, just a couple of other things that are going on in the world. I told you about Project435.com. This is something that you want to, anybody that you know who's seriously interested in running for politics, you need to let them know about this. This final piece that I wanted to share with you before I pick up all the rest of your calls is also from Slate today. The headline by Christina Cautermucci is Texas is poised to ban all insurance coverage for abortions, forcing women to buy rape insurance. Yes, if you are female in Texas and you want to be able to get an abortion if you've been raped, you must buy rape insurance if Greg Abbott has his way. This weekend, the Republican-led Texas Senate approved the bill. It has already passed the House in Texas. It's going to Greg Abbott's desk. The bill would prohibit all insurance companies from covering abortion care in their standard plans, so you have to buy a separate rape policy. This is bizarre. Representative John Smithee, S-M-I-T-H-E-E, who sponsored the bill in the House, said in a floor debate that the bill promotes economic freedom. Right. Why is it that conservatives say, you know, we need to deregulate? The government does too much. The government is regulating too many things. And then they pass regulations about who can and can't get insurance to cover an abortion. Really? I mean, you know, the old joke from, you know, and I forget which female comedian said it. I think it might have been Stephanie Miller years ago was, you know, Republicans, you know, want to shrink government down to a size where it can fit inside a woman's vagina. I mean, this is obscene. By restricting abortion care, writes Christina Cautermucci for Slate, by restricting abortion care to those who can either afford an additional monthly health care expense or a hefty one-time payment out of the blue, in other words, just paying for your abortion with cash, Texas is ensuring that low and middle-income women with health insurance will find it significantly more difficult to access a constitutionally protected medical procedure. These guys just don't give up. Patriarchy, hierarchy, oligarchy, that's their name. Roosevelt in Natchitoches, Louisiana. Am I saying it right, Roosevelt? Roosevelt, you are on the air. Okay, I'm going to put Roosevelt on hold here. He's on line 8, Chris. Tabitha in Riverside, California. Hey, Tabitha, what's on your mind today?
Okay, first, when you say get involved, maybe we should include the police departments and the military. It kind of looks like the fascists might be infiltrating the police departments, like back in the day when they kind of let all that and they joined in on the beatings and stuff. So that might be a thought. Maybe these some of the good people, protesters and stuff, should get into the police departments where they'll have authority over.
Yeah, no, it's real and it's well documented. The Klan infiltrated police departments, or arguably you could flip that upside down and say many police officers enthusiastically joined the Klan back in the era right after the release of Birth of a Nation back in the 19-teens. I think it was 1913. And that led to that whole decade or two, leading up to and through the Roaring '20s when all these Confederate monuments were put out. And there's an authoritarian mindset that is not necessary to be a police officer, but is over represented among police officers, and that's also overrepresented among Nazis and Confederates and basically traitors. These people who hate America and want to take us back to. They don't even want to take America back to anything America was. They want to reinvent the Confederacy, and it's so wrong. But excellent point, Tamara. Thank you for the call. Roosevelt, you want to try it again? No Roosevelt. Okay, let's go to Casey in West Palm Beach, Florida. Hey, Casey, what's on your mind?
Tom, how you been, buddy? Good
Great.
to hear
What's
from
up?
you again. I want to make a couple points, and I got a question for you. Okay, we all know just what Trump has tapped in, which was the racist platform of the conservative base, and there's different ilks of it. But the Democratic Party, that's what their platform was, is to run. They're bad people. They're the bad people, and it didn't work. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, but that wasn't the Democratic Party, and that was nowhere in the Democratic platform. That was the strategy that was put together by Robbie Mook and John Podesta for Hillary Clinton's campaign, to tell us all how terrible Donald Trump was. We already knew how terrible he was.
But it didn't work, though, Tom.
I know it didn't work. That's my point. That's why I'm being derisive of it.
Right, but the thing is, though, is that people are still, the thing is, though, is what is the Democratic Party going to do to get back to the roots of their platform and gain back voters? People are just going to say, okay, Trump's a bad guy, we got to go back to the Democratic Party. People are still not happy with both parties. So what are they doing? They're sitting on their hands.
They're actually not. The Congressional Progressive Caucus has been very active. The Democratic Party came out with this Better Deal thing, which I think is a terrible name, but they're, the cornerstone of it is breaking up big corporations, is enforcing the Sherman Antitrust Act, which will raise salaries all across the country, which will open up massive amounts of entrepreneurial activity, or opportunity rather, and will be a good thing for the country. It's going to be a damn hard thing to do because you're going to have, every industry is now controlled by essentially a functional monopoly, 3 to 5 companies that price fix with each other. It's like, the airlines. If one price goes up by $1 within a day, they're all there. It's to the point on media where if you try to channel surf on the cable TV networks, they all go to commercial break at the same time to discourage you from doing that. I mean, it's like it's all a giant monopoly. So I think the Democratic Party is moving in the right direction, Casey. I get what you're saying, and I'm assuming you're not a concerned troll who's just trying to trash them. I think they're moving in the right direction, and if you're concerned about it, join them. Go to your local Democratic Party, show up, be one of the people who gets to be the ones who decide what's the Democratic platform and who gets to decide who the candidates are in the primaries. Become a precinct committee person. Jan in Seattle. Hey, Jan, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. 1 second. Let me take you off speaker. There we go. I'm on the phone. So I've been listening for a while now, and I wanted to mention something that's happened with DeAndre Harris, that young man who was beaten.
Yes.
In Charlottesville.
Is there news?
His family or friends started a GoFundMe site for him.
Yes.
With asking, we're looking for $50,000. It is now over $125,000.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah. Isn't that great?
Yeah.
I mean,
that really, truly is. I would like, however, for the FBI and the state or city police in Virginia and Charlottesville to be looking at the videotape or at the footage, rather, photographs
yes.
that Greg Palast has of the people who committed this crime.
Yes,
they need to be held to account. Dan, thanks for that. Thanks for sharing that. I did not know, and I'm really glad to hear that. Thank you. Ed in Hillsborough, North Carolina. Hey, Ed, what's on your mind today?
Tom, how are you?
I'm well. What's up?
Well, thanks for all you do. I just wanted to mention that I have a concealed carry permit for a firearm.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of places where I'm not allowed to take my gun. I can't take it into a bank. I can't take it into a courthouse or any kind of government building. And watching his demonstration the other day, I was struck by how many of the members of the alt-right and these neo-Nazis were armed.
Yeah, I've seen estimates of around 80%.
And I can't help but wonder, wouldn't it be possible to make a condition of the permit for them to hold the rally that they not carry firearms? I mean, isn't this a matter of public safety?
I think it is, Ed, but I'm guessing that they would immediately sue based on the Second Amendment and the Heller decision, which I think was wrongly decided by, 5 right-wing justices on the Supreme Court. But, these kind of rallies are illegal in most of the world. Canada will not allow Nazis to have a rally, for example. And there are times when I think that we over-fetishize the First Amendment. On the other hand, I would not want to do without it. You know, I still remember back in the, I think it was in the 60s when the Nazis wanted to march in Skokie, Illinois. The march never happened, but the ACLU was defending them in court, and you know, it was a big deal. And you know, I support the ACLU in that. I just, you know, but yes, you know, marching with weapons. This is why open carry states really need to reconsider being open carry states. It's just, you know, this is just, you know, the NRA trying to jack up the sales of weapons. I mean, that's what it all comes down to. And now, you know, in addition to that, by letting the assault weapons ban expire, we now have, you know, weapons of war on our streets, as well as you know, just, you know, generic guns and long rifles. So, Ed, I share your concern. I just don't think that it would get past that Second Amendment concern, which is pretty bizarre given that the Second Amendment was put there to protect slave states. Ed, thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Lowell in Salem, Oregon. Hey, Lowell, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Hey, Tom. I wanted to ask about if maybe these attacks by cars are going to start causing us to improve pedestrian safety. Because, you know, one of the issues, you know, like in New York, remember when the car drove over all those people? It was stopped by those barriers.
Right.
It would have continued if the barriers had not existed. So will this encourage like city planners to start putting in barriers?
I doubt it.
So that,
you know, I doubt it. Cities are so strapped right now for cash, and states are dialing back. I mean, particularly red states, you know, where they will not raise taxes because they don't want to offend the rich people. But it's an interesting question. Lowell, sorry if it sounds like I just shot down your idea. I apologize.
Not at all. You know, the concern I have is typically in the newspaper, anytime a pedestrian is hit, the blame is entirely placed on the pedestrian. You know, they should have just been watching out. You know, they should have been wearing brighter clothes. You know, there's no blame ever put on the driver.
Well, Heather Heyer was in a crosswalk when she was hit. I mean, she was crossing a street legally.
And you know, the way I see it is, you know, society has been steadily desensitized to the deaths of pedestrians and bicyclists.
Yeah.
By, you know, you wouldn't believe the number of times you hear the joke, 5 points if I hit that bicyclist, ha,
right.
ha, ha.
Right, yeah. No, it's a good point. And you know, my concern is that, you know, ISIS is encouraging the use of vehicles, and apparently so is somebody on the hard right, because there have been a number of vehicle attacks against American civilians by right-wing traitors here in the United States. Lowell, thanks for the call. Amir in Algonquin, Illinois. Hey, Amir, what's up?
Good afternoon, Tom. Thank you for your program, and I probably want to ask you to run for the office because you are one of the person who is not sold out yet. Anyway, for the racism is the scary part is because they are mostly young and now they are educated and they have a good job and they can support financially all this thing, and is the scary thing because right now for that, because they can support it, money and everything, and buy this, and I'm not going to be surprised if they gather money together and for that guy with the car, I forgot his name, but anyway, kill Heather. And that is the scary part. This is not like before. It used to be some white trash, or they didn't have job, or rob here and there and support money. Now they have money, and that's the scary part.
Well, this kid was living with mom, and he had a history of domestic abuse. And mass murderers tend to have histories of domestic abuse. And, you know, he certainly was trying to commit mass murder. He only killed one person, but he badly injured, I think, 19 others. But, yeah, your point is well taken, Amir. Thank you very much for the call, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. It's coming up on about 11 minutes before the end. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Binion in La Crosse, Florida. Hey, Binion, what's up?
Hey, Tom. First-time caller. Just want to let you know I really enjoy your shows. I watch you on TV and listen on the radio and have for a while. I am an advocate of medical and recreational marijuana. It does work, and on all fronts. And but getting back to the statue thing, of course, I was born and raised in the South, and I am a Democrat. I am not a Nazi. I'm live and let live. And, but it's just disturbing watching mobs tear down statues, to people like me that don't hate and that have lived in the South. And, you know, a long time ago, small towns like where I come from, we have these statues. It's just part of the town. And nobody sits around and hates under these statues. And the majority of the people I know don't hate. And I know there are some out there and everything, but it's just disturbing to see mobs doing what they do. I just don't think mobs are the way to change anything as far as that mob mentality. Now, people demonstrating, I think that's the only way we're going to get anything done, because we can't wait for the politicians. We got to hit the streets. But just that whole idea of people kicking and mobs, and I've seen it happen, and it looks just like what you see when they were showing ISIS tearing down these historical structures and statues and part of the history over there and everything. And it's just a reflection. It just looks
well.
Like
ISIS was doing what they were doing because they literally translate the first commandment, "Thou shalt have no graven images," to mean no pictures and no statues. And so all statuary and all images have to be destroyed wherever ISIS goes. That's a very different thing from saying we don't want a statue of a traitor who declared war against the United States of America, and which led to the death of 600,000 Americans. We don't want a statue of a traitor in our town anymore. Thank you very much. I have no.
But we're not all like that. We're not.
No, I get that.
It's just bad.
I get that. I lived in the South for 13 years, Binion. I have some sense of it, and I know what you're saying. And there's probably a lot of white people who just never really thought about it. But if you were to visit Germany and you were to see a giant statue of Adolf Hitler in the main town square in downtown Frankfurt, what would you think?
Yeah, but I don't think, just like you couldn't relate to say the ISIS thing is like that, I don't think you could say that's like that, because that was just an all-out, entirely different situation there and everything. And I understand that
Hitler tortured and murdered people, and so did slave owners in the South, Binion.
I know, but all slave owners didn't murder people in the South. All of them didn't treat them like that, you know. And
Binion, there was not a single slave owner in the South who was not part of a system that was murdering and torturing people, period.
Well, I don't know. I wasn't there then and everything. I'm just saying.
No, I'm talking about the system itself. The system was murderous. It was violent. We're talking human beings here, who were raped, tortured, sold, torn apart from their families. You know, it's not enough to just say this is our heritage, or that statue's been in this town since 1925, when Birth of a Nation created the revival of the Klan and a whole, effort to bring back the Confederacy. It's not enough to say that, Binion. You've got, at the very least, start talking about putting up monuments to the horrors that were done by those same people. I mentioned this on the radio yesterday. I live down on the waterfront here in Washington, D.C., And 1 block from where I live, I just learned a couple weeks ago, was one of the biggest slave markets in the United States. It was, right on the waterfront, and slaves were brought in and shipped out, and there's no monument, there's no nothing. Nobody even knows it was there. There's probably some Robert E. Lee Street somewhere in Washington, D.C., or certainly in Virginia, just right over the border. There's all kinds of Robert E. Lee stuff. And it's just at some point, the mob, your description, the people will stand up and say, no, we don't want this. Binion, I thank you for the call, and thanks for a civil conversation. I appreciate it. Bob in Deming, New Mexico. Hey, Bob, what's up? Bob? Okay, let's try Ishmael in Washington, D.C. Hey, Ishmael, what's on your mind today?
Nothing much. I just want to share with you a quick thing about, I don't know if you were looking at CNN. You remember the big demonstration we had at the January 21st, was it?
Yeah, the day of Trump's inauguration. It was the 20th, the inaugural demonstration.
Actually,
that's the one that the Justice Department wants all the IP addresses for the 1.3 million people who use the website.
Exactly. That's what they're doing, and they filed a case on today in D.C., so we have to keep an eye on it because, if, quote unquote, if they're going after the people who have the right to demonstrate it, and do that, guess what is going to be the next?
Yep.
Tell me exactly.
Well, I'm baffled as to why this is not the top story at the top of the hour on CNN and MSNBC, because this is a big deal. This is as Joe Biden would say, a BFD. Ishmael, thank you for the call. Amen. John in Paso Robles, California. Hey, John, what's up?
Great, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. First off, I do appreciate your scholarship. Thank you very much for what you've done.
Thanks, John. We only have about a minute and a half before the end of the show, though, so let's get to it.
I want to make one reference in particular, and I don't think it's emphasized enough. There's an article that appeared February 5th, 2016 in Scientific American. The title is Race is a Social Construct. And just the first paragraph reads, more than 100 years ago, American sociologist W. Du Bois was concerned that race was being used as a biological explanation for what he understood to be as a social and cultural differences between different populations of people. He spoke out against the idea of white and black as discrete groups, claiming that these distinctions ignored the scope of human diversity.
Yep.
Today, the mainstream belief among scientists is that race is a social construct without biological meaning.
It is.
And I don't think that point is emphasized enough. We're all part of the same human family.
Yes, we are.
And I'm just ashamed that how the media and politicians do use those labels, white, black, brown, or whatever, to just basically self-serve themselves and maintain the status quo.
Yeah, I don't disagree, John. And race is a social construct, but it's a very, very powerful one. It's been used as a social weapon for millennia. John, thank you for the call, and thank you all for being with us today. It's been a fascinating day. Keep an eye on the Justice Department looking for 1.3 million people who used a website to plan a demonstration against Trump's inauguration. And you might want to, I don't know if you can do it by Twitter or whatever, encourage the national corporate media to pay some attention to this story. It's a big one. And in the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us. That includes you. Get out there, get active, tag, enjoy. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates. helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeats.com.
Police, for the most part, pulled back. We would have been crushed like cockroaches if it were not for the anarchists and the anti-fascists. So that
Antifa meaning anti-fascist.
The anti-fascists and the crucial role of the anarchists, because they saved our lives. Actually, we would have been completely crushed. But that is just the theater. It's big money. It's big military, and the way in which this capitalist civilization is leading us toward unbelievable darkness and bleakness, facilitated by the scapegoating of the most vulnerable of immigrants, Muslims, Jews, Arabs, gay, lesbians, trans, and bisexuals, and black folk. The white supremacy was so intense. I'd never seen that kind of hatred in my life.